staff to the commission. On the agenda today is the SR 520 Portage Bay Bridge and Roanoke Lid project, and that'll be from 9 a.m. to noon. In the afternoon, we have a subcommittee that a couple of you were invited to on the Ballard Pump Station. There were some changes to that we need to approve. After the introduction of commissioners, we'll ask the team to introduce yourselves, including the people that are online, and then we'll ask members of the public that are present to introduce themselves. Today, we'll hear a presentation by the project team. Then the commissioners will ask questions and discuss the design and make recommendations on the spot and take a vote at the end. This time, because we have a lot of information to cover, we've broken it up into 3 parts. So we hear a presentation, then do questions and recommendations, then hear another presentation and like that. So 3 sections. And on your cheat sheet that I gave you, you have a breakdown of the times and the topics so that you know which ones you're going to comment on. Brian will be leading the action. And we do have interest from the public in the fire life safety building. And we've asked them to come at 11 for public comment so they don't have to sit through all those topics. So let's do first introductions of commissioners in the room, starting with Ray.
Ray Gastel, Commissioner for Planning.
Sharing this with
Molly Switzerland, Urban Design Commissioner.
Caitlin from Getting It Commissioner.
Katie Boger, Landscape Architect Commissioner.
I'm Markham Engineering.
Good morning, Kevin O'Neill, Transportation Planning Commissioner and Acting Chair.
And then online is Ben.
Ben Gist, Architect Commissioner.
And then commission staff.
Hi, I'm Wendy Badger.
Robin McGonigal, commission staff.
Okay, and then let's see. And members of the public.
Morning, Ryan Packer with the Urbanist.
And then I think the rest of the folks are your team. Project related, right? Okay, so go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, I'm Bradley Touchstone, Bridge Architect with the Design Build team.
Mike Modis, architect with the Design Build team.
Terry, I'm design engineer, planning designer.
Brendan Kemp, Landscape Architect, Project Team.
Judy Wade, Landscape Architect.
Todd Gerson, I'm with the Washfed 520 program team.
Chelsea Eunice, and I'm with the Washington Communications team.
Matt Garrett, Washtenaw Landscape Architecture for Design Lead.
Graham Nova, Washtenaw Landscape Architecture.
And then do we have any team members online that everybody's here in person?
People. Brad, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Brad Schaefer, the structural lead for the design team.
Rosario.
Rosario, the design project engineer for WashDOT.
And Brianna.
Good morning, Brina Parks on the WashDOT 520 team.
So we're all set. Actually, let me just ask one more question. Does anyone have any disclosures? No, okay.
Yes, I worked for SDOT for a number of years. And I was involved at an upper management level overseeing this project for a brief period of time, but that was a number of years ago. So, but I just wanted to expose that.
Well, real quick, I'll highlight the agenda. Kind of tee this up a little bit. We're going to do a very brief introduction, kind of overview of the project as a recap, follow up to the last meeting that we had with you all here. And then we're going to go through these kind of 3 distinct parts. We're going to kind of take you on a journey from east to west through the project, talk about the Montlake side, the bridges, and then all the connection points on the west side of Portage Bay, as well as the fire life safety building. And then we'll close with a preview of the Roanoke space. We have a lot of content to cover, so we will try to be brief and succinct for some parts and go into depth on some others. So it all together. We did kind of quick presentation or introductions for the design team. The four of us will be the primary presenters today. We'll dive right into the project overview. So you see here, just overall illustrative plan of the project. This is the final piece of the SR 520 project, kind of capstone piece, bridge replacement for Portage Bay Bridge itself, and then connections with the prior project at Montlake, a new lid and open space connecting the Roanoke Historic District, North Capitol Hill, as well as improvements at the I-5 interchange, including a pedestrian bridge that will improve connectivity to East Lake. That is a topic that covered extensively in our last meeting. Today, we're going to focus primarily on the balance of the project. So look, zooming in here on the west side, just to highlight a few things, a bit more zoomed in, we do have that I-5 Roanoke Trail Crossing Bridge I just mentioned, the fire life safety building, the overall lid and open space. And then you can see heading off eastward, Portage Bay Bridge itself, the new bridges, as well as connector bridge that leads to the shared use path that will be on part of the South Bridge. As we span across Portage Bay itself, you can see the two bridge structures side by side. And then as we approach the east side, the Montlake connection, connections to the existing Bill Dawson Trail, the Montlake Tunnel, as well as other circulation and connectivity to the neighborhood fabric there. So kind of touched on this, the three major elements of the west end of the SR 520 project being the Montlake lid that's been completed, opened to the public. And then we are really picking up from there westward all the way to I-5. We zoom out for a moment and kind of take in the full context. The SR 520 trail network is one of kind of the backbone of the project. We're actually extending it all the way through across Portage Bay to North Capitol Hill and the Roanoke District, helping to facilitate further connections outward into the community and future connections that will help bring commuters and casual cyclists and travelers even as far south as downtown. So the SR 520 bridge all the way across Lake Washington includes the shared use path. The Montlake project continues that through Montlake, and then we are that last piece. One of the driving inspirations for the project overall is this idea of a distributed network, kind of a river delta as you hit an arrival point, which you'll see a little later. Really, all of these potential directions that users will be able to go, really enhancing the connectivity for everyone using that 520 trail. Project overall has had many touch points with the Seattle Design Commission going back 6 years or more. There's really a kind of a long-term project and vision for this. Today, we are in the midst of the design build process. So that was a selection with WashDOT. The STC has been involved. So we have ongoing meetings and workshops with the Design Commission to review design progress as we finalize the design here. And so what does that look like for us specifically as it relates to architecture, urban design, landscape architecture? There's a series of design packages that are being developed. You can see how it's broken out, kind of color coded here on this slide. We had an early works package for the I-5 Trail Crossing Bridge, which we shared with our last presentation. Today, we're focusing more on west package and the east package, as well as the fire life safety building and the overall bridge architecture. Overall, the design process we're going through, we're in the midst of our preliminary design phase that will go through once that's submitted, go through a WashDOT and City of Seattle review process. We'll receive comments back, develop the final design, another review cycle, and then the drawings will be released for construction. There are aspects of the project that are already released for construction, some of the early works that's ongoing, some of you may have noticed that. And then a lot of this urban design, architecture, landscape architecture will be coming online a bit later. So our urban design review plan, today is April 3rd, so this is kind of our fourth official touch point with the commission. And we have a couple more upcoming as well later this spring. Kind of highlights some of the major topics. You can see we're really focusing on the bridges themselves, the ancillary bridges, fire life safety building, as well as kind of a design update and progress related to the open space, the overall urban design of the project. When we get back to the next couple of meetings, it'll be a deeper dive into kind of the overall urban design landscape architecture. So some of the major things that we'll be focusing on those next couple of meetings is really materials and finishes, the planting design, gateway elements, the overall experience and wayfinding. So you may find that some of these topics are not discussed in depth today, but they are coming. Overall, in terms of connectivity, this is a great diagram. It starts to illustrate that idea of the river delta that we looked at a few moments ago, especially as we approach the west side of Portage Bay. We really have our delta moment here, which we'll share in more detail as part of this bridge that will connect from Portage Bay Bridge up to the street level of Del Mar. And you see all these connection opportunities, whether it's going north to the Roanoke District, south to North Capitol Hill, west to East Lake, and further afield. Montlake connection portion as well has, tight connections into the Montlake district as well as additional connections into the community and neighborhood beyond. So you're looking at Montlake, the existing connection here dashed in as you go through the Montlake project. We'll be talking, starting out talking about this Montlake connection as well as the Bill Dawson Trail and the underbridge experience there. Zoomed in a little bit here on the west side. Again, I was describing a moment ago that delta idea, all of the connection opportunities that come off of this trailhead here. You see with the white dot. And then set the stage for some of the things that we'll keep going back to. Wall finishes, really picking up on design language from the Montlake project. So the Montlake ledge, which has these ledges that protrude outward, primarily roadside walls. On the back side of those walls, we have the inverse of that, so a slight impression into those walls. And then where we have pedestrian scaled spaces, this adds pattern, more texture, which has far more texture to it, and as part of that pedestrian and cyclist user experience. There's a number of walls and that throughout the project, and we've been working with WashDOT and the overall design team and construction team on some refinements relative to the original concept design. Won't get too deep into this right here immediately, but the main driver was connect the consistency with some of the surrounding conditions, and where there's battered walls that are intended for roadside walls, where there was an opportunity to say, we're tying into the existing condition, they really ought to be vertical. So a subtle change, but we'll talk about that in more detail at a couple key locations and why that's so important. Again, the design language picking up from Montlake, a series of various types of lighting fixtures and railings, carrying that same theme through this project with a couple of additions. We'll have the bridge columns along Boyer. They'll actually be uplit from the bottom rather than washed from above. And then we've also introduced this transitional fixture, which is among the kind of kit of parts for SCL, but helps immeasurably on the west side of the project in terms of spacing, and we'll touch more on that here. So what you can see, this gets a little bit technical, but these are the two primary pedestrian light fixtures used on the project. We'll go too into depth, but if you look at the two diagrams that show the throw of the light, you can see it's quite different. And so for the east side of the project over by Montlake, the marina fixture is the primary fixture we use there. So that's carrying through with all of our improvements on that side. As we get to the west side of Portage Bay, we're introducing the transitional fixture, slightly more modern character to it. But what it does for us is it gives us 3 times the spacing between light poles. So the visual clutter, the number of lights is cut down by 2/3, which is a really helpful thing. Something we'll touch on in more detail in our next presentation as well. Continuing the kit of parts, the design language family. So we have a handful of site furnishings and amenities. So There is a single grill, a single drinking fountain at the Roanoke lid, as well as benches that harken back to, probably didn't mention this earlier, but one of the things that's so special about our project is that it is linking two legacy Olmsted Brothers projects, which is tremendously exciting for us all. There's Roanoke Park directly north of the lid, and then to the south, we've got Interlochen Boulevard. So this opportunity to pull in that design language, the World's Fair bench, part of the design language that's in the park, even kind of that continuity is something we're really excited about. We also have the City of Seattle standard trash recycling and compost receptacles, bike racks, and removable ballers.
And this is the kind of a first look at the sign family that we're looking at implementing across the whole project, from for pedestrian level.
And here's the roadmap of our presentation today. So I mentioned earlier, we're trying to take you on a journey. We're starting out on the east side, so we'll touch on the Motley connection, Portage Bay bridges, and some of the ancillary bridges. Encircle the Roanoke open space and touch on some of the landscape conditions there, and then cap it off with a preview of design progress at the open space itself. So that will dive right into Motley connection.
And what we've done is at the Motley end, it's a smaller sign family because it doesn't include the historic district or the interpretive. The interpretive has already been done in the Motley section of the project. So this is just a smaller set of signs that will be at the Motley end of it. And then this is a schematic look at where some of the signs are located and those main pathways that we're looking at, where people are going to travel.
So the probably picked up on the fact that connectivity, circulation is one of the underpinning elements of throughout the project. So here at the Motley connection, a little still more zoomed in, you can see the where the Bill Dawson Trail is in the dark blue, the neighborhood connections in the purple color, the SR 520 trail as it comes through, the darker orange, and then the lighter orange showing the new shared use paths that are going to be incorporated and implemented as part of this project. In terms of bike and pedestrian access, you know, you can see the numerous lines here. There's a big focus on this. We've got pedestrian access points. There's a single stair that also provides a shortcut from the grade change at Montlake Boulevard down to the Bill Dawson Trail, which is going through that tunnel underneath Montlake Boulevard. You can see in blue the bicycle circulation. And all these routes primarily accessible. We do have the single stair, but the grade, the slope of these routes is under 5%. So this part of the project does not include any ramps. As we zoom into that initial connection there from Montlake Boulevard, a couple of key elements. We have that stair I mentioned. We have a switchback path, less than 5%. That brings you down to the level of the shared use path, Bill Dawson Trail. So these graphics are illustrating kind of the initial design concept, that baseline that we started from. And then this is kind of the proposed refinement that we have here. Key difference, so the baseline RFP concept in the small window in the upper left, you might see that the wall element at the switchback trail is a little bit smaller. And there's a proposed wall element that was intended to deal with the grade change between the existing NOAA facility immediately north of this area. One of the refinements we're looking at doing is actually shifting that wall back to the trail, so that you'll see that in a couple of views here, so that that'll reinforce the trail alignment and also limit any kind of disturbance that would otherwise be needed for the construction of that wall or negotiating those grade changes at the property line. So from the Bill Dawson Trail, this is a view looking westward. You can see the Portage Bay Bridge off in the distance there. You can see that switchback path that leads up and the stair coming down as well. And then as we head westward along Bill Dawson Trail, a couple images here of just what that existing condition looks like. You can see, not a whole lot of head clearance underneath the existing bridge. It does back up to parking area that's currently used by NOAA. And you can just get a sense of kind of the existing character, fencing, close proximity to the trail, and overgrown vegetation as well. So as we go through this space, I mentioned earlier some of the design refinements related to walls. Initially, some of these roadside walls that are highlighted in this light blue cyan, or I guess the light blue color, not cyan color, were intended to be treated as roadside walls with that 10-to-1 batter. Those walls also tie into these facial walls that help to screen the bridge abutments and enhance the character of these underbridge spaces. So when we were taking a close look at that, this is one of those proposed refinements we had to actually make those walls vertical so that as they approach these, the facial walls that are in cyan, there would be kind of a smooth transition rather than having to adjust or kind of have an awkward interface between a batter versus a vertical face. And that's what this starts to look at. So this series of diagrams is highlighting these walls. They're arcing rather than just the flat face of the abutment wall beyond. It's also concealing that abutment so you don't have what I'm sure many of you have experienced going under some of these bridge spaces. You have a steep slope. This is going to be flat and open. So we're really trying to open up this space underneath. Some of the views you'll see in a moment will help to illustrate that. But this also conveys that design language here for these two walls. They do have a subtle arc to them. And then as they have this return, they go back vertical and tie into those roadside walls that I just mentioned. So looking at the first one, the larger one, this is underneath the main bridge, the abutment. So rather than having that kind of very utilitarian flat face of the abutment wall itself that's supporting the termination of the bridge, we do have this facial wall that will extend outward and just kind of reinforce just the path alignment and this kind of arcing experience through the space. What you see here, these panels that are mounted to the wall are going to be a buffed stainless steel, so they'll have a reflective quality to them and play off of the underbridge lighting. So there's a series of path lighting as well as girder wash lights that will help to illuminate this space so it doesn't have that same dark character that the existing condition does. So it'll be a much more pleasant experience for cyclists as they're coming through this space. In terms of these reflective panels, they are, they have varying sizes, so they kind of modulate up and down. Kind of fingers that will stick up in between the spaces, between the girders, those girder bays. I mentioned that lighting that'll be going through there as well. It'll help to illuminate the space, and then the slight angle that will allow some of that light to come back and hit the trail itself. So we've been getting into some of the more technical details of how this will be constructed and fabricated. And you can see here just that kit of parts from the actual face of these panels, the frame that's supporting it, how they're going to attach this, that outside face that's arcing is also still battered. So that also helps a little bit, give it more character. And then due to the openness of the space behind, there will be an element of bird deterrent screening so that that space doesn't become a pigeon roost. So a couple of views of what that space looks like. The top view there, we're kind of standing, floating in NOAA's facility there, their parking area looking back. So there will be a continuation of the existing fence type at the NOAA property line through this space in lieu of kind of the existing chain link that's there. So an enhanced fence type. And then looking back, we're actually standing on the lower image, we're standing on the sloped walkway leading up to a bridge structure that we'll touch on a little bit later that ties into Portage Bay Bridge itself. So it starts to give you a sense of the scale and character of that area. Definitely more open than the existing condition. I will note, and we'll see it in a couple slides as well, just the edge condition as we're coming down is still being worked on. So this particular set of graphics is showing a slope. And you see a graphic that shows a wall right at that edge. There's a number of subsurface conditions that we're still working through as the design team. So don't pay too close of attention to that condition today. And then this is a rendered view showing, again, that same composition. There will be underneath the bridge itself where there's kind of low light levels in terms of natural sunlight, no rainfall. That will be more that cobbles as well as some boulders and habitat logs through that space that help to relate to the shoreline condition as well that's immediately west at the edge of Portage Bay. And I'll note you can see that path light there. The lights themselves are tucked up on the girder bays, so that's why you don't see the rest of them, but they are present and they will be helping to space. Go a little bit further south, so there's a similar architectural fascia wall that's arcing and concealing that abutment. This is underneath the off ramp from 520. Similar treatment. The only real difference here is because this is a box girder section or tub girder section, excuse me. It doesn't have the same relationship for the girder bays. We don't have the reflective panels. It's a much smaller span overhead, but picking up on the same kind of design character. And another couple of views of what that area looks like. On the top, we're standing a little bit further back, but looking north on that same sloped walkway. You can see the Bill Dawson underbridge area with those reflective panels a little bit further back. And then we're looking on the lower image, we're looking up at that connector bridge structure that leads up to the bridge level. And a quick rendering of what that space will look like. Similar character, we do have the open space between the off-ramp and the main bridge that will be densely planted. And then we have the same kind of ground treatment and some of those habitat logs in the underbridge space. Also point out the railing type here that you'll see in several places. This is the West Approach Bridge North railing type. So that will be, that's another design language element that's carrying through much of this project when we're on the actual bridge structures. Touch briefly on that space in between the off-ramp as well as an on-ramp and the main bridge. This continues to be kind of in development here, but this is illustrating that baseline design concept that we had. The main change is that what you see at the kind of the inside of the on-ramp loop there was a series of stormwater infrastructure elements. Those have actually been shifted to the outside of the loop, more conducive to some of the slopes, the pipe slopes, and how that drainage system would work. So there's going to be a service turnout on that west edge there. And there's still some elements of this that are in development, but the intent is that there would be a screening element, a berm up at the top, and then a slope down to the trail level. You'll see again that same NOAA fencing type for design continuity through this area. That'll help to delineate the highway zone from the area alongside the Bill Dawson Trail. Another view looking a little bit more westerly, back down to those same underbridge areas. And that kind of leads us to the bridges.
I'm going to have to stand up. Good morning. I'm Bradley Touchstone, bridge architect with the design build team, and I want to carry you through the main bridge portion of the project. Go ahead. And I'll touch on the overall design layout just to give everybody kind of a refresh of what the major components are, and then we'll touch on the ramp to the Bill Dawson Trail. We showed that diagrammatically last time. We've got a lot more refinements to that now. We'll also touch on the main bridge and some of the refinements and changes that have been made to it since you saw it last. And then we'll talk about the ramp to Delmar Drive. So really the overall, big picture of the total project. Go ahead. So these are the main components for what we call the Portage Bay Bridge, the main bridge project, which is the Portage Bay Bridge North structure, the Portage Bay Bridge South structure. We've got the eastbound off ramp. We've also got the RSUP ramp down to the Bill Dawson Trail, which is a separate structure, and then the loop ramp, which is the ramp to the Delmar Drive. When we met last time too, there was a request made that we show an overlay of how this compares with the existing alignment for the current bridge. And so you'll see this is the Portage Bay Bridge North, which will be the first structure that gets constructed, and then the Portage Bay Bridge South, and then the red dashed lines are the the outline of the existing bridge that's there today. Okay. Picking up where Brendan left off, I mean, what an amazing transformation. I mean, I have to say, when I saw, the existing photographs compared to what this space is going to be like is really pretty phenomenal. So as people are coming under the under the bridge on the Bill Dawson Trail, they're going to be able to connect up to the RSUP trail on the main bridge via the ramp structure. This is from L1, so this shows the original configuration for what that structure looks like. You can see here's that Bill Dawson Trail, and then we get onto elevated structure over water connecting with the SR 520 trail. The structure itself is trapezoidal box structure cast in place with simple rectangular columns to reflect the same architecture of the main bridge. And so the current configuration for the bridge is very similar. We've made a couple of little minor tweaks to the alignment. Last time when we talked, there was a desire to kind of really ease up that intersection as much as possible so that you don't end up with that kind of abrupt normal angle to the RSUP. So we've really tried to ease that as much as possible. And then also looking very purposefully about where that connection falls relative to the pier locations for the main bridge and the ramp structure. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But overall configuration is very similar to what you see in L1. Lighting for this structure is going to be via the integrated illumination on the railing itself. And so this is just a quick layout showing how that illumination is going to work. So where all the fixture placements are going to be and what that overall detail looks like for that. This is the Wobbin rail, but it has the lighting integrated into it. And then you can see here the 3D axonometric view of the ramp structure. The main bridge, this shows the overall configuration of it with the pier locations. And so we're maintaining those very long, parabolically arched main spans. We've got piers 1 through 12. Piers 1 and 12 are actually the abutments. And then 2 through 11 are the primary piers for the structure itself. It does transition from a trapezoidal box structure to a beam structure as you approach the east end of the project where the ramp structures are. And so here you can see the overall configuration of the typical spans for the main bridge with the parabolic haunches, the tapers per the concept plan with the chamfered rectangular cross section for the piers. Something we're missing. Is that too fast? Okay, there we go. So this is the cross section of the bridge at Pier 6. This is where a lot of stuff is going on. You can see that we've got the equipment platforms, which we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. One major change that you'll notice is that the foundations for the main columns are now above water, whereas they were at the mud line originally per the concept plan. There was an ATC during the proposal phase, which elevated that transition from the column to the shaft off of the mud line. The design team has elected to take advantage of that ATC for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about in just a second. That places that transition at an elevation 2 feet above mean high water. And this would be the steel casing for that shaft would be stripped. So it is a concrete element that's extending up, not a steel shaft. It comes up above the water. Also, the configuration, it is a 12-foot diameter drilled shaft for the primary columns. It gets slightly smaller for some of the smaller columns, but primarily it's a 12-foot diameter shaft with a 7x9 rectilinear column extending up above it. So there was a lot of work that's been done to try and minimize the impacts of this change. And the most important thing is how does this comport with the current Coast Guard permits? And so we have consulted with the Coast Guard to make sure that we're following under the requirements of the existing Coast Guard permit. It meets the requirements for all the navigational openings. And also the location of this was a hotly debated topic, because if that transition occurs just slightly below the water, so we've lifted it off the mud line, if it occurs just slightly below the water, then that creates an underwater hazard, which has to be delineated with buoys, with some reflective tape, a lot of other things that would, I think, distract from the overall architecture of the bridge. And so we wanted to avoid that. So what is the minimum amount that we could extend above the water and be able to satisfy that safety to navigation requirement for the configuration? And that got us to that 2-foot elevation above mean high water. That's very similar to what's happening at the West Approach Bridge, almost identical in terms of its overall elevation and configuration. The main benefit to this long-term is the fact that we're now moving that very critical connection above the water line. That means that it can be inspected without divers in a post-seismic condition. And that's a big deal, because to be able to lay eyes on that and inspect it means that if there's a big seismic event, the bridge can be reopened much more quickly. And so that, I think, represents a significant benefit to the project. And as we go through the rest of the bridge presentation, you'll see that that change has been reflected on all the renderings. So it'll give you a sense of, okay, what does this mean in the sort of totality of the structure. We talked a little bit last time about the equipment platform, and we had some very basic diagrams. We've now gotten a much more detailed design concept for that. One of the interesting things you'll notice is that there is actually a little telescoping bridge section. These two equipment platforms can be connected to one another so that the maintenance crews can go back and forth between the two structures without having to go back up at the main deck level. Also, right now, this rendering shows a little vertical picket. That will be a wobbin rail that is the same as the RSUP at that upper level. It'll be a much more industrial kind of railing system down at the equipment level, but that's not something that anybody's going to ever see, really. And you can see kind of right in there is where that equipment platform exists down at Pier 6. Go ahead. And when we met last time, there was a request made that can we get a view kind of at the water line looking up at this to get a real better sense of what this is. So these are the equipment platforms at Pier 6. You'll notice that we are keeping the bottom of the pier of the maintenance platforms above the bottom soffit of the superstructure itself. So they are mostly concealed from all of the sort of reasonable vantage points around the project. Okay. So again, overall design layout. This really illustrates also the locations of the corbels, the kind of sort of secondary architectural tempo that's created by those corbels. And you'll notice the magenta ones are the primary corbels, and then the blue ones are the secondary corbels. I showed you guys also last time this the spreadsheet from L. This shows us all of the stuff that's happening on the deck of the bridge. And I'm not going to go into it in detail, but it's been a very good tool for us to really make sure that all of the CCTV poles, all of the light poles, all of everything, all of the accoutrements that are on the deck level are falling at these regular intervals and are consistent with the corbel locations. And then also you can see this is the yellow is actually the different pier locations. And so you can see also the sort of tempo of corbel placements as it goes across the length of the bridge, so that we're creating this very sort of regular rhythm with all of the above deck accoutrements. One of the things that we talked about last time was the reconfiguration of the piers down at Pier 3, switching from a 3-column configuration to a 2-column configuration. And I think we all agreed that that was a good idea. It really does begin to open up the view shed. It's also consistent with the kind of architectural language of the other piers along the water span. And so here you can see what that view looks like. Another change to the pier configuration that we didn't touch on last time is what's happening down at Pier 10. That's where the eastbound off-ramp occurs. And the base concept called for all of these columns to be lined up in a constant, on center, basically. And as we're peeling off that eastbound ramp, we really wanted to twist the alignment of those columns just ever so slightly to get them normal to the radius of that curve. You can imagine that if those things are skewed, it creates a lot of complexity with regard to that beam placement. And so we looked at it in plan view and also in the model in 3 dimensions. What we determined is that there's really the main northbound, Portage Bay Bridge North, Portage Bay Bridge South columns still align with one another. These are pulled far enough away that that slight change really doesn't make any kind of visual impact to the structure. And so here you can see this is actually the pair of columns that we're talking about right here. Also included in this rendering is the step. So this is where we're transitioning to the beams. And you can see, and this is allowed per the concept plans, there's actually a small step in the superstructure depth for the ramp only. That allows us to, because that ramp's coming down, we really need to thin up those beams as much as we can in order to accommodate the head clearance down at the trail. And so that's why you see that little notch right there. You can also begin to see too how that eased curve is beginning to work with the connection up at the RSUP. This is again that same view looking west from Boyer. These are the kind of overall renderings that we prepared for the project so far. Here you can see now looking south, picking up on, you can see that above water foundation and the visual effect of that. We've also included all of the signage and the lighting and all of the corbels, the drainage system. So fairly comprehensive look at all of the little nuts and bolts of the project. And then again, view looking north towards the marina. And then at night, obviously the main bridge itself is not illuminated, but the roadway lighting at the deck level will provide some lighting. Okay. And then this is going along the RSUP towards Delmar, towards the lid, and that leads us to the spiral ramp, which you can see here. This is again from L1. This is the concept configuration where we've got this actually coming off of the bridge, and then you can see the spiral ramp as it connects to Delmar, again with a cast in place closed cell system for the superstructure. And so our configuration is very similar. We're following very closely what was conceived in the concept plans. So we're coming off of the main bridge and then rotating up to Delmar. One of the things that we have done, we've shifted the abutment slightly down at the lower piece right here. What that does is, because we're chasing grade, we wanted to create a little bit more headroom at the abutment so that you can get up under there and inspect the bearings. It also really helps us in creating in balancing the spans. It compressed the spans on the lower portion of the ramp a little bit, and it allowed for a little bit more efficient structural design. We're still working on the abutment in this location. What we're going to probably do is just slightly take this radius and turn it just a little bit, skew it just slightly more so that we're getting a little bit more normal to that, to the radius of that curve. But it'll be create some continuity in terms of how that abutment then relates to the wall configuration. Similar to the ramp at the Bill Dawson Trail, illumination for the spiral ramp will be via the illuminated rail system.
Oh.
And then here you can see in axonometric view how all that stuff begins to come together. You can see that we are chasing grade pretty severely as the project drops off. So this is the relocated abutment here, and then all of the different wall types, the portal underneath the lid. So all of that, the composition of that thing, I think, is really kind of coming together. Okay. I think we want to pause and see if there's any questions. Or do we want to wait until we get to the?
Yeah, we were planning on all of the bridge and ancillary, and then we go into discussion. So if you're done with the bridge, okay, great. And then I noticed that some other members of the public joined online. And so what we've decided is to do the public comment at the end of each presentation for those topics. So we wanted to first ask if any members of the public that are online or in the room have comments on the bridge and ancillary bridges or the Montlake connection. We'll give you 2 to 3 minutes to make public comment on that. If your comments are on the fire life safety building or any of the other connections, let's wait until that's been presented. So, but for now, if anyone wants to raise their hand who's online, who wants to make public comment about the bridge or the Montlake connection, I'll unmute you then. The raise hand function is up at the top of the screen. Looks like a hand. Okay. Okay. So, so let's go into.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. At this point, I think I'd like to open it up to clarifying questions. Reminder that we're going to have a discussion following questions, but this is a chance for people to ask about anything that we saw. And please jump in if you have relative questions to each other. Goal is not to be in order, but it is to get to the answers. Does anybody like to start? Would you like to start?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I definitely have questions about wayfinding, but as I understand it, that's going to be more of a focus of a subsequent
Yes.
presentation. So the only question I'll ask then, since you had a slide on it, is the design of the signage itself. Is that consistent across the entire 520 project, or are there variations to it?
The signage from, basically from Lake Washington to I-5 will all be within our scope. And so it's using the Seamless Seattle program, WashDOT bicycle signage standards, and the other things that we have are signs for the historic district up in Roanoke neighborhood area, and then interpretive signage, which is already matches what's already existing in the New Montlake area. And so it's that whole span. And so there aren't any of the Seamless Seattle in the Montlake area now, but we will be adding that when we do this other part of the product.
Okay, that's, I mean, there's a lot, because I have seen the wayfinding signage on the east side, over on Evergreen, which is, I think, well designed, or got me where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
I think it's complicated on the Seattle side because the Seamless Seattle, City of Seattle has its own bike
Yes.
wayfinding signage as well
Yeah.
that people are used to. So it just, I don't want to get into the weeds now if we're going to be talking about that more, but there are a lot of factors to consider from a design standpoint. That was my main question, Brian.
Yeah, I had to piggyback on that. The old parks that you are now joining, are we incorporating that signage style, or is the new park another layer of signage styles?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Olmsted is, you let off that you were connecting two very key Olmsted parks things.
Okay.
And now we're putting a little link between those two, but yet coming up with our own signage style, or are we using the Olmsted linkage signs?
It's newer and more contemporary, yes. So it's not a direct replica of any of the legacy Olmsted signage types.
The stone markers are not being replicated like you did on Mont Lake. And that is, we're not touching Interlocking Park. We're not touching Roanoke Park. So we're not creating a park, city park with the lift cap, although it functions that way.
Yeah, sorry, the comment of connecting those two things threw me off, and I didn't know which standard we were using.
I have a question
Yeah,
kind of related to what we started on. Has there been any community engagement activity with the community in terms of maybe what are the things that are working in the existing trails, what's not working with the existing bridge and trail, and especially getting more into the details of the under the bridge, the logs I saw in your renderings. Are there like reasoning behind that? Has there been any feedback from the public on those things, what's working, what's not working, what's desired?
I haven't seen any of it. I don't know.
I I think we're gonna Matt jump in, but there's been a lot of, leading up to, depends on what timeframe you're talking about. So I'm gonna say that, during the conceptual design, even before the conceptual design, going through some of the public design process, the public was involved, and then there was, design commission, that helped inform the final conceptual design, which was the basis for our contract requirements. And it fed into what the design team is building off of. So I would say yes, that's the history, a lot of public touch points during that. If you want specifics, we could always follow up.
Right.
It's pretty clear to me right now.
Great, thank you.
I had two quick questions just related to the ramp at Del Mar. Just coming out of the subcommittee, I wanted to see, have there been any continued refinements to the column locations under the ramp or anything that's been studied related to this?
We're still studying that, so good chance that we can share some of that refinement in the next workshop and subsequent.
Great, and it sounded like some of the wall pattern thinking and radii and application are part of that next round as well.
Yeah, you'll see when we'll kind of pick up where we left off and continue on our journey, and you'll see some of those refinements when we get back in the presentation.
Okay, great, thank you. That's my only question.
My only question was just in the renderings, how far, what are you showing for height above water of the piers? Is it the full 2 feet?
This is the 2 feet above mean high water.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's showing like, okay, mean high water, yeah. So worst case scenario, do we know how?
I believe mean low water is 2 feet below mean high water, so max exposure would be 4 feet.
And what is you said that it was almost identical to the other piers.
The West Approach Bridge has exposed cylindrical bases. Yeah, and it's that condition that's similar.
Understood, but what is almost identical and what are they doing and why are we doing something slightly different? Like if we are going to do this, why not match is my question.
Saying they are exactly identical would be a dangerous thing to say.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer for how much different they are, other than visually it's very similar.
Can I just add a bit of facts around it? So the Wapping shafts terminate about approximately 11 inches above high water mark. The caveat around that is the shafts are in the 7 to 8 foot diameter.
Yeah. So the existing bridge is 11 inches, let's call it a foot above water. These are bigger shafts and going to be 2 feet.
What about the column size in that, relative to the shaft? So
The column sizes are larger.
Proportional.
Yeah,
that's.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, please.
What's the dimension from the face of the rectilinear portion of the column to the outer diameter of?
It's 30 inches max. So that's on the 9 foot side of the column, which is this face here. From that face to there is 2'6".
Okay.
Okay.
Square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. And it's as close as it can get.
Yeah.
We're really trying to hold as tight as we can, so we're not creating a big platform.
You had talked about columns a little bit. Some of them you had specifically mentioned were chamfered. Some of them looked awfully squared off. Are we going with one style of column?
All of the columns have chamfers. They're small chamfers. It's like a 2-inch chamfer on the corner. So it's not a heavy.
Just for form work, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then only the main span bridges are included?
That's right. The ramp bridges do not have a taper.
So even the exit ramp columns?
Let me look and I'll tell you for certain. I need to look at the plans and see where we're.
And the columns that are underneath the non-boxed areas are the same style of columns?
That's well under the, you're talking about under the beam bridge on the approaches.
Right.
No, they are, let me pull up those drawings and I'll be able to show you exactly what.
Yeah, I guess my question was, we typically only see a render of one style. We never really saw the whole bridge together. And so I guess I'm wondering, I'm hoping that we use one style column throughout.
The only reason I hesitate is there's a slightly different condition where the columns connect to the beams with the integral pier cap.
Correct.
And let me pull up that drawing and then answer that question for certain.
Okay. Do you have any more follow-up?
One more.
Yeah.
Okay. On a different time, going back to the beginning on the Mott Lake connections. I know that, back in the day, there was a really extensive community planning effort for that whole Mott Lake lid. So I don't want to go back in time too much, but as the design has evolved and as we've got to this point, how has the community been sort of kept up to speed on where you are now or what the latest is?
This one did work on the Long Lake project, so.
Probably when you touched this last, we had a tunnel underneath SR 520 just east of the current proposed PDD abutment profile, and septet issues kind of work against that as a good principle. We did, some of the principles that we're trying to incorporate with the basic configuration that's shown here today is direct and intuitive, open, and kind of meeting the septet principles of environmental design. So.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think
The public has definitely been engaged, as well as the design commission and stakeholders such as DEPers, and all the advisory boards. There's been plenty.
Okay, great. So you've done the city advisory board.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
If I can respond back to that, yeah, they are flared. They're slightly smaller, but they're the same flare top. So it's essentially the same form, only slightly smaller. In some cases square, but instead of rectangular.
Same family.
But the same family, they do have that flared cap.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we're in the middle of the thought.
No, I was gonna go into a different question.
Mine's related to the base of the column.
Great.
Okay. So in subcommittee, I know that we talked a little bit about acknowledging that the columns themselves were designed in their form when the idea was that they descended straight into the water as that rectilinear form. Had there been any considerations since then about, we talked a little bit about the questions of using that cylindrical form and the rectilinear form. Have there been any other conversations since that point about how to streamline these forms with each other?
There has been a pretty extensive kind of exploration, and where we came to was simpler is better. Just not trying to call, the exploration led us to the fact that we were calling way too much attention to that transition. And if we just kind of leave it alone, it tends to sort of disappear a lot more. It became very self-referential.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
We shift to under the bridge at the east side. There was a couple of renders that showed that as a rather low clearance. And then we have a couple of renders that are rather grand in how generous they are with height. So this looks very low. I understand that that's at the exit ramp, not at the primary bridge, but even the bridge in the distance that is the I-beams. Yeah, that looks rather low. The render with the mirrors tucked up into the I-beams looks rather low. And then you later had a render that was 20 plus feet high. And I'm just scaling off of your little purple people. What kind of clearance is it actually?
It's the bare minimum would be 10 feet clear. So I don't have the exact kind of head height clearance over the trail. I know kind of the minimum is you get up proposed narrow part, which would really be where those reflective panels are, not a walkable, accessible zone. Bare minimum would be 10 feet.
10 feet at the pathway, not at
It's
the
more than 10 feet.
meters.
That's what I'm trying to say, is it's more than 10 feet of pathway. I don't have that exact number. We can check and get an answer for you shortly, but.
It's 10 feet out the wall.
Right at the wall, yeah, so it is a little bit taller. The rendering is a little more on the evocative side right now.
Oh, sure.
I will grant that. Yeah, there's still, we do have the constraints of, just the profile and the grade of the path itself, the roadway above. It is a little bit, I think it's more open than it is today vertically, and certainly horizontally, that exposure and the kind of the views outward will be a huge improvement to what that experience feels like as you get there.
Yeah, I hope that our goal is not just improved from what's there. How tall is that large front fence?
It's just over 6 feet.
And the short one? That's
The short railing is going to be 54 inches tall because it's against a.
And what tells you to transition from short fence to tall fence?
It's a relationship to essentially where kind of the NOAA property ends. So it's a relationship to property lines and boundaries.
Federal facility and security.
And that's on the south side of the bridge is.
It's primarily on the north side and kind of the west portion.
So this whole slope has a very tall fence that lines up with the south edge of that bridge. Yes, the transition from short fence to tall fence is at the south end.
Yes.
And that's NOAA?
So
basically, yes.
WashDOT has an agreement with NOAA to provide access or use of that space, should there be remaining space. It's a little circuitous.
I think you can show a better diagram. See what, I think you're trying to visualize the fence.
This tells me exactly where it is. It just doesn't have that that lid at 10 feet, right?
Right.
I'm just thinking of a 6-foot fence in a 10-foot opening. Seems
So the,
jaily.
if I may, if you could go back to that, Brandon, so go back to that one you had up. Yeah, that one. I don't know if this will answer your question, but help your cut. So what Matt was saying, so as you see that 6-foot fence winding around, that's what you're talking at, right? The into the picture, on the other side of the fence is the NOAA facility. And then as you come under the bridge, the WashDOT has an agreement to, as Matt was saying, to lease the space under the bridge for parking because it's contiguous with their parking lot. And so that fence is there for security under the bridge to protect that parking area under the bridge that NOAA will use, part of that security. So that then that's why there's a transition at the south end. Brendan can speak to the location of that transition, but that's why the 6-foot fence extends under the bridge. Does that make sense? Does that help?
I mean, it tells me what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay,
Can I just ask?
yeah, please.
There's the kind of pretty rendering that shows this space from the trail to the south.
This one here,
That one's very generous.
it's a little.
Yeah, so I think that's not a sensitive fence, right?
It's not, well, it's not the 6-foot fence and it's not the 10-foot high clearing, right? So this is better in both of those worlds. Where's the other one that the mirrors were nestled up in the girders? Can you show that render?
Is it this view or?
It's another render, but it was.
I think those are the big ones. Yeah, sorry. I think this is the there. This view showed probably the elevation view best articulates the relationship to those girder bays.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions or do we switch to conversation and deliberation? let's switch. Anybody like to lead off? Let's go in order then, right? Oh, Ben. I thought Ben would chime in if he had a question. Just one. Yes. Oh, well, what do we think of this, guys? Been a few minutes since we saw the last version of this. Some of us have been in subcommittee. I think that the improvements are going in the right direction. What are we thinking of in terms of next steps, things we'd like to see more of, advancements in certain areas? I think our questions seem to be honing in on specific aspects, so that kind of plays our hand a little bit, but how do you find this?
Overarching, I want to appreciate the team's general adherence to all of the work that was done to develop the RFP and the ways that they've been considering really fine-tuned refinements. Really appreciated seeing refinements to things like the bike routing, so the easing of the curve. I know that was a concern that came up for you last time, Brian. So I appreciate seeing that from the subcommittee. So on a lot of these issues, I've appreciated the gentle fine tuning simultaneous to the adherence to what was in the RFP.
Do you have any further recommendations for refinement, or are we settled in you?
I think what I heard was desire to have some conversations about the kind of fence and overhead condition, the 10-foot and 6-foot condition, if we want to talk about that. It sounded like we should at least, I heard some agreement over in this corner. I want to make sure we open it up to other commissioners about the column refinements and adjacency to the water. I personally appreciated hearing that the team looked at what happened with the geometry between the rectilinear pieces and the cylindrical shafts. I heard from you, Brian, and you say that you appreciate the simplicity as well as the team named it, but I want to see if anyone else has any thoughts in that area, if we're feeling comfortable with the team's study of how simple it is in that location.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I'm not another person. I go with the before, but this came up in subcommittee, when the shafts, emerged above the water line. And I think I've always felt that the simple is better. You have an articulated relationship of the flare of the top of the column and how it meets the bridge structure. So it feels like keeping that simple down below. Yes, it really would have been ideal to be able to plunge that whole column directly into the water line. Perhaps that was over aspirational at the beginning, it's sounding like. So functionally, this is what we have, and it makes sense the way it's rendered and conceived of, and kind of a simple structure, keeping it, like you said, that, as tight as possible, the diameter of the shaft to the relationship with the column. So it feels like it's the best of the possible world of what it is. And appreciate that it is similar to what's happening in Montlake. That same, but has that kind of relationship there. So,
and I would just add that I found the comment that this allows for easier inspection to be compelling. We know from the West Saddle Bridge experience that inspections of bridges is really important. We are in an earthquake area, so that, I think that's kind of logical. And, I agree with the goal, but I think this seems to be a good balance of aesthetically and functionally.
A question that might be a little bit more clarification. I'm assuming from the way the renderings are done and some of the other assumptions that you assume that people will continue to be able to freely circulate by kayak or whatever waterborne means underneath columns as they do today.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I know this seems a little, this maybe perhaps you can answer. Does CCTV look at what's under the bridge as well as what's on top of the bridge? I'm not saying it shouldn't, I'm just trying to understand. It won't change my kayaking behavior. I'm fine. Sorry. I said it won't change my kayaking behavior.
No, it's all above the bridge of the roadway. I'm not aware, there's no security cameras under the bridge.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But in any case, the main point that I was just asking, in a sense, it's a clarification question, is that people will be able to continue to move on the water.
Yeah.
Along
Yeah,
the bridge.
the Coast Guard permit that was mentioned is for, it also covers a navigational opening because there's recreational boats. There's some docks on the south side of the bridge.
Right.
Over on the west end, so there's a navigational opening for that use. And then everything else is open for the smaller craft like kayaks.
And again, this is in the realm of clarification, but the NOAA parking lot is today underneath. Is it correct that today it goes underneath the existing bridge?
Yeah, there's no lease with WashDOT to the park under there, but they're vacating that for the project.
I see. But then they'll get it back.
Whatever remains is
with the reconfiguration. Okay.
And this one was also a bit of a clarification for the team, and just a quick one. With the column configuration that we're seeing, this precludes the buoys or fencing on the shaft, correct?
Correct.
Great. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the reason, as Brandon was saying, for the seismic inspection, and I appreciate how much you all have looked to what is the simplest solution. How can we not have buoys? How can we not have fencing? And how can we call the least attention to this transition and retain the elements of the structure? Really appreciate that.
I think from the technical side of the world, I've never objected to that. I kind of like it, especially since it matches the other parts of the bridge. The challenge I've had with this bridge is that I see this as a one bridge continuation all the way across Lake Washington, and the stylistic changes along the way are the thing that have confused me, especially this bridge going from primary span to I-beams along its own span. That's the part that really challenges me, not the pure interaction with the water. This is a very straightforward way to do it. I think we'll notice the transition from this, which, I mean, it's a classic thing. Whenever we choose to render things, we specifically don't render the other part of this bridge, right? And that is for a reason. It's not by chance, it's by choice, right? I think that's the problem I've always had, is that there's 4 more sections to the left here, and we are definitely not rendering those. Okay. Base columns, lighting. I think there was a comment about some of the columns being uplit and other columns being not lit, but then lighting coming from the roadway itself. To me, that's a little confusing as to why do we have one answer for some columns, but not all the columns. Does anybody else have a recommendation or comment that we should attach to this?
On that topic,
Well, we're talking specifically Mountlake Connection and the bridges and ancillary bridges.
I mean, I just said, going back to my question, that on Montlake Connection, there's a lot going on. There was a very, very involved community planning process. I think it's great to hear that you're going back and rechecking in with the community, with the advisory boards. I just think it's critical that, you know, anytime there's a, you know, a years gap between planning design and actual implementation, it's just, I just think it's really important to keep all those stakeholders engaged all the way through. So it's great to hear you're doing that, and then just, you know, definitely continue to do that.
Is there a specific slide? You're referring to?
I think we'll touch on the column lighting in a few moments. So
Okay.
Yeah,
the next piece I think would be,
okay. That's not in the bridge.
no, it's going to be part of the west side under bridge discussion, which we'll touch on in a moment.
It occurs only at Boyer.
Yeah, only on either side of Blair, away from the shoreline itself, so that there's no lighting that could interfere with wildlife.
Understood. Can we take a vote
No, I think at
Interim?
the end.
at the end?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have our two areas are sort of the underbridge experience at that east section. And I think that encompasses a number of things in terms of fencing, just that whole experience, but I'd like to see more advancement in it. Especially with the competing networks. There's the underbridge experience at the east side, and the fact that we have very different renders of very different heights and what does that space actually look like? I think it would be nice to clarify that.
And to build off the trail, correct?
Names.
Yeah, and we talked about that at subcommittee, and so there was a change from subcommittee to today, which was in the kind of model view, the kind of bare bones view, where you are seeing those direct relationships. At subcommittee, we didn't see the fencing, and we talked about to have that real life, so we are seeing a verification. So, you know, I think going that one step further to be able to understand what that looks like in the pretty view as well, and what it feels like, and are there any modifications that can happen, because the reality is very compressed.
Yeah. I think I'd like to understand if there's an option to take that tall fencing
Right.
and actually delineate the NOAA property and then take the short fencing and extend it underneath the bridge, so we're not trapping people under a bridge. Is there a way to do that? I think that,
Because probably the floor to head height scenario is probably not particularly negotiable, so the negotiation would be
within how do you make it feel open and
the, you know, the additional structures.
And my question would also be in seeing, so you have the trail level and then you have the parking lot level, and we discussed kind of two different conditions between those, whether it is a steep slope condition or whether there's a wall drop off. And so I am curious, I would want to see the team explore what's the relationship of the fence to that area, where are the property boundaries associated with that, and what's plausible in order to not just have this 4-foot gap between the fence and the bottom of the structure there. So just understanding what the opportunities are that the team sees to make that feel less tightly enclosed.
Just to clarify, that's 6 feet fence. That's the requirement. That can't get any lower.
Correct. Yeah, this is federal, against the federal facility, and it's consistent with the existing fence. That's, well, not right at that location, but over at the Montlake connection where we saw that switchback pathway, there's existing fencing of that exact same type.
yeah. So I think we could talk about where that fencing line goes, because it does stop and transition to a low fence, and it's not actually providing a barrier to entry. If you just walked along the fence, you would gain an entrance to that known area.
Is there any way to not have it directly adjacent to the trail?
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
What I was asking
Right.
is, where is the property, so between the trail and the parking lot, if we have the slope or we have a walk within, where is the property line within
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Can we step down and then have a 6-foot fence?
what is that? Or in effect, what would
Parking
be
is
an
under
8-foot
the
fence,
bridge,
right?
I think parking is under the bridge there.
Also, is that 6 foot requirement if it's a wall now instead of a slope? Does the wall count as part of the 6 feet? and the
It
fence
wouldn't
is kind of
because
less?
the wall wouldn't extend above the back level more than a few inches. So I think there's some open-ended questions on the design side of what's feasible with that slope right now. So I think, when we come back at our next subcommittee workshop, should have more clarity on really what's possible in that space than we know today.
Yeah, and I think, if it could not be direct, I think the perception too of being in that space and being cloistered and, kind of a constraining condition, if that can be offset, if there is that potential, I think that.
Not to throw WashDOT under the bus, but this underbridge area is maintained by WashDOT. It's not their policy to be out there every week picking up trash, and so I think the more expansive space that we create there, it's not a city facility, so we don't get that type of space.
Yeah, so you're opening up by creating an edge condition, you've opened up a maintainable or unmaintained space.
Well, sounds like further conversation, right, which is exactly what we wanted to highlight. I think we are approximately on schedule if we want to transition back to presentation for the next few minutes.
I'll stand up this time as well. All right, so we're really picking up where we just left off. So Bradley kind of teed us up with the Delmar connector bridge. It's this spiraling kind of corkscrew. We affectionately call it the corkscrew ramp that gets us from the bridge level up to Delmar and points beyond. So this kind of portion, we're going to touch on a lot of the kind of the west underbridge area. We're going to start at the Delmar connector bridge and some of the refinements there. Drop down along Boyer, work our way up along the north side where the new Roanoke stairs will be, and then continue on our journey. So this is highlighting the circulation opportunities here. First and foremost, it's really about the connection from the shared use path along the 520 trail on the Portage Bay Bridge south, and how we get up to the level of the rest of the surface streets there. And then starting to see some of those connections take form out and beyond. Some of those earlier diagrams we saw, this point right here, that's the trailhead. That's where the delta begins. Next slide, please. Oh, here we go. So highlighting the different kind of modes of connectivity. So we have the bicycle, shared bike and pedestrian access primarily along that shared use path. We do have existing sidewalks down along Boyer, and then we also have pedestrian access points along this pathway that leads to the top of the Roanoke stair, as well as the steep slope along Roanoke to the bottom part of the Roanoke stairs as well. In terms of accessibility, all of those primary routes we just highlighted are accessible. There are some zones where there's a pedestrian access route that's following, either the roadway slopes, which can be a little bit hilly. This place is one of them, and then also the stair for the Roanoke stair there as well. There's also a short stair here as kind of a shortcut for pedestrians to jump up from the lower ramp level. We are negotiating quite a bit of grade change throughout the project. So we do have this switchback path that leads up. There is a route that doesn't involve dismounting a bike. It does have a sharp corner given the spatial and grading constraints here, but there is a short little bypass. That stair does include a bike run. We'll see that. So kind of design refinements here. Bradley was touching on some of those adjustments and refinements to the abutments, both the lower and upper abutment for this bridge structure, as well as shortening up that span. So kind of the the first spot, the lower abutment shifting out a little bit more over the slope, and then that upper abutment, you can kind of see it clearly here with the portal wall that extends out and then those dashed lines representing the abutment. One of those refinements has been to actually orient them so that they are just one continuous plane. We don't have anything kind of breaking that up, kind of a cleaner experience in relationship to the roadway and just that overall portal experience. One other element that we'll see here, there's a seat wall down here at the base of the Bagley stair, and this is also the relocated Bagley viewpoint, which we'll see in a moment as well. And so just a subtle adjustment to that seat wall. You can see its configuration here, hugging closely to the shared use path. We've actually tucked it back a little bit, and you'll see when we see that 3D view, you'll get a sense of why we made that refinement. So this is showing that overall composition. You can see that kind of singular plane of the roadside wall and the abutment, the upper abutment. Initially, a couple of these walls were also we talked early on about kind of the reclassification of some of these walls and the relationship of that finish. Initially, this was classified as a roadside wall, which would have that larger Montlake ledge, those kind of protrusions that you can see out there today. However, that's generally meant for roadside conditions. And so here we have more of a pedestrian scale space. This is where bikes, pedestrians are going by. So we've worked with the team to refine that to be that adds pattern, that more textured pattern that relates to those pedestrian spaces throughout the two projects. And so here's the base of the Bagley stairs and that seat wall adjustment. So initially that seat wall was kind of hugging the edge of the path and reinforcing that. It's helping us negotiate some of the grade change from the upper level down to this access point. This is generally a 2-to-1 slope through here, so it is rather steep. But by tucking this seat wall back a little bit, we've accomplished two things. We've eliminated any conflict with that bike runnel so that there's no protrusion where that could become a pedal catcher as people are trying to shoot down. And then also by tucking it back ever so slightly, it gives just enough room that if somebody were to be perched on that seat wall, their knees and legs aren't dangling into the path. So we've given a little bit of a niche for people to tuck into there. This area in particular, I mentioned, the grading just through here alone, we've got 70 feet of grade change from basically that lower portion of the Del Mar Connector Bridge all the way down to Boyer. This area is also part of a historic landslide. So a lot going on here. What we've really tried to do with the grading scheme is just kind of smooth that out where it's been feasible, remove a little bit of fill that will ease the load on that landslide area. And then also just generally tie into all of the existing context there. This is the existing condition today. So there's an existing wall along the west side of Boyer. It's generally open to the east down to the water's edge. And then you see that these columns, the existing bridge columns are right there, front and center, basically part of the sidewalk. And so as this space gets a little bit more refined, in the next couple of slides, you'll see that it's generally opened up. We do have a connection to that existing wall just behind here. That the rest of that wall is going to be reconstituted underneath the bridge within the washout right of way. It will transition from roughly 7-foot height down to a maximum of 4 feet as quickly as we can. A couple other key elements here. So there is a portion of the bridge, these columns, this is Pier 2 right here, Pier 3. First column is actually just sneaking into view here. So you can see that the columns have actually been pulled back considerably from the sidewalk. They're not part of the sidewalk experience any longer. These are also the 2 columns that will be uplit. So there will be a series of 3 lights oriented kind of with the roadway that will help to wash the bottom portions of those columns. We'll touch more on lighting sides of the street. On both sides, yes. So Pier 2 and 3 are the 2 that get lit. They've got this more kind of voluminous space as well. So there's a lot more happening there, and they're set back from the water's edge as well. So there will be security fencing, bridge security fencing here at Pier 2. Again, tucked up the hill, set back from the sidewalk. There are areas underneath the bridge, generally corresponding with where there's limited sunlight, as well as potential for rainfall where it's not going to be practical to have plants and vegetation growing there, but it will have a similar mortar set cobble treatment, boulders, logs that we saw in those underbridge spaces on the east side as well. Also worth noting, we do have a viewpoint, an overlook here. This is the Boyer outlook that is looking out towards the bay. So another small gathering space with a couple of kind of seat wall benches that also offer, you can see these same finishes that tie in with the rest of the project. So this area becomes kind of directly in dialogue with everything that's going to be happening up above at the lid level as well. And then a view outward. So we do have, you can see those columns, the bridge columns out in the distance. This will have a view out into Portage Bay. This area will get revegetated and replanted. Again, some areas underneath at Pier 3 there will have that same underbridge treatment. And then there will be some restoration elements down at the water's edge as well. As we continue around, so as we wrap around from Boyer, this is the Roanoke Stair area. So there's an existing flight of stairs that leads down kind of a zigzaggy path, and it actually comes, kind of into where this future roadway will be. So we'll be reconstructing those stairs. A couple refinements here. With the stair itself, we've actually reoriented this last little portion with the kink. So it's actually a straight shot all the way down, improved sight lines down through this space somewhat. And then also the stair, this is kind of a more minor update, but the stair up here broken up into 3 shorter stairs to help negotiate some of the grade change there. We'll see in a moment, a couple other slides. You can see that we start to introduce a series of walls. We're currently working on this. This is, again, part of the grading challenges and constraints that we've got here, trying to maintain slopes that aren't excessively steep through this area, but also addressing minimum soil depth cover to support all the trees and vegetation on the lid, and then the configuration of the stairs themselves. Another thing to note here as we look at the vegetation and the placement of the trees, there's a lot happening underground through this area. There are a tremendous number of utilities that all have corresponding utility offsets and setbacks. We've got a water line, we have communication lines, we have a major power line undergrounding effort that's going through this space. So we end up rather constrained as to where we can put trees. So where the original concept had the trees kind of moving in and out, we have much more of kind of a narrow sliver that we're afforded where we can actually plant those trees. So that's another one of the challenges through this space that we are working through. But yeah, with all those underground utilities, it's definitely a challenge here. Next slide. So here's an overall view of that stair. So you can see that straight shot, over 50 feet of grade change through this area alone to get down to where Roanoke picks up again. There are existing residences on the north side here. One of those residences has an existing footpath that comes off the existing stair. So that's one of the things that will be reconstituted. One of the kind of constraints we have for where we locate some of those landings. You can also see there is another element of kind of security fencing. This is part of the overall ensemble of these portals that we'll touch on in a moment as well, but there is some fencing, similar fencing type to what we saw down along Boyer as well. And you can start to see where those terracing walls come into play to help negotiate that grade change as we go around that portal wall and tie into the Roanoke stairs. Some of this is also driven by the fact that 11th Avenue is rather steep in and of itself. So a lot of grading constraints as we try to get everything to tie in this area. Speaking of those grading constraints, this is a grading slope analysis here. So you can see those contours. Everything in red is basically approaching a 2-to-1 slope. And that's kind of our maximum slope that we can do within this space. And you can see how these walls are helping to break that up, creating some, easing up the grade through those areas, but also basically we can't get a straight shot, from the bottom of the stairs all the way up to where we're hitting those minimum soil depths on the structure itself. Couple more views of what that looks like, and just what that experience will be. Okay, so the next piece, we're kind of going to look at some of the streetscape areas kind of around Roanoke open space, and then we'll also get into the fire life safety building in a moment. So I want to start off with a kind of an overall view. We're kind of looking primarily south in this view, so you can see 520. This is the bridges themselves are ending right about here, so that's the Pier 1, the abutment. You can see that Delmar RSUP connector bridge right through here. We were just looking at the Roanoke stairs that come up. I think this is kind of an exciting view because it really you start to see how all of this is coming together here. And so we're going to start looking at some of the trailhead elements over on the far side there, as well as along Delmar. Touch on the fire life safety building, and then we'll get to Roanoke open space. So overall, again, starting off with a series of circulation and access diagrams here. So this is just looking primarily at the neighborhood connections from the streetscapes. Starting again, that trailhead element starts to branch out. We've got all the connectivity to the Roanoke stairs to the Roanoke district. As we work around, we have a connection that goes through the open space, ultimately comes out to Harbor at Broadway, and then we also have those connections out towards Eastlake. You can see here the bike and pedestrian circulation routes. So there are some dedicated bike routes as part of this area. And then in terms of accessibility, we do have a primary pedestrian access route that connects all of these spaces that is fully accessible. There are portions of this area that are, following the roadway grades. So we do have areas that are, over 8.3% in terms of the grading, but those are tied to the roadway rather than kind of new pathways that we've created. So starting out at the trailhead, this is the Harbor Trailhead at Harvard and Broadway. Couple key refinements. Overall, this is generally the same configuration. Again, this kind of theme of grading constraints plays out throughout the project. A couple of the refinements that we've made, one being that this is the Olympic ramp that comes from 10th down to the Harbor Trail. That got extended a little bit just to make the grades work. But the main thing that changed here is this wall. So there is a retaining wall as part of this slope. The original design had that wall basically be the north edge of the trail. And as we've developed the design and explored this area, we've actually pulled that wall out from the edge of the trail. This has a number of benefits, including some of the geotechnical issues with this area, but it also helps to open up the trail considerably, and we'll see that in the next slide. So with the railing types, originally, because that was a wall with a sharp drop off right at the edge of the trail, you would have another one of the guardrails 54 inches tall right at the edge of the trail. And now as that wall has been decoupled from the trail itself and pulled away, we actually open that up considerably. We don't need a railing. That wall itself will protrude 42 inches above the grade behind the wall, the ground line there. So the wall itself will be kind of the guardrail element. And then at the trail level, it'll be much more open. Let's get disconnected.
Sometimes it likes to focus on a particular slide.
Just take it all in. So here's kind of an overall view as we get to that Olympic ramp. You can see how this wall, we refer to it as wall 2W, how that's been pulled out, decoupled from the edge of the trail. So that trail edge, much more open. You can also see that ramp that comes up and some of the retaining walls that are involved in this area. One thing I also want to point out, this is again touching on some of those wall refinements. the portal wall experience is, you know, a really important aspect of the lid. And so a lot of those roadside, all the roadside walls associated, particularly with the portals, have that 10-to-1 batter. That carries through, but as we kind of approach the section that follows the alignment of the trail, we actually transition to a vertical wall at that point. That simplifies some things in terms of constructability and all the rest, but also given that it is tucked back from the roadway, it will still have the same finish. So you'll still see that Montlake ledge pattern across the face of that wall. This area from the edge of the roadway back to the wall will be densely vegetated. It's one of the areas where we'll be doing just packing it with as many trees as we feasibly can as part of the tree replacement aspect of the project within the WashDOT right of way. So that transition is kind of occurring in the simplest way possible, but also tucked back away from the road where once the vegetation grows in, won't be very visible at all. So a couple of sections through this space that help to articulate that. You can see the tunnel that's going to go underneath 10th Avenue and the retaining walls there. You can see the ramp coming down from 10th Avenue starting to appear. You also have a sense of where the right of way is there, and you can see that 10-to-1 batter of the portal wall as it's making that radial turn and heading out from the roadway itself. And then the next slide will be a little bit further back. We've made that transition to a vertical wall, quite subtle. You can see the switchback portion of the ramp starting to emerge. One nice thing about all of these portal walls is because the wall height itself is 42 inches above the ground line, there's no extra fencing. There's no visual clutter that comes along with that. And then here we've backed a little bit further away, kind of down at the curve level. This is, of course, adjacent to the I-5 northbound to 520 eastbound ramp that you can see just here on the edges of the graphic. You can see that retaining wall that continues along on the upside of the trail. There's a lawn space between the edge of the trail and that wall. So overall, you can imagine if that drop off that you see here was set right at the edge of the trail and you had a guardrail right there, it would have very different kind of character. But we've been able to shift that wall further out. The top of that wall is kind of almost level with the pathway itself, and overall will feel much more open. So this is looking at the grading within this area, kind of between that wall 2W that you see here and the ramp system that brings you down to the trail level. And then another view from up on 10th, basically looking at how that works its way down. We'll touch on in just a second this outlook area. So this is the Olympic outlook. A good view of the Olympics in the distance. We'll talk about some of the minor changes and refinements there. This totally gets into the weeds, but what we've been looking at really closely over the last several weeks is how all of the different railing types and guardrails all come together, making sure that there's a clean continuity between the handrails and the relationship, how all that comes together. So at the outlook, on the left-hand side, you can see that baseline concept from the RFP. We've made a couple overall subtle adjustments that help. So this is one of the few locations where we have these outlooks where the outlook is not kind of projecting outward with a parallelogram type form that you'll see in the other outlooks, but rather it had kind of a tucked back recess for a small seat wall and kind of raised planter wall behind. All of these outlooks have a wood lean rail type. So there's part of that design language carries through from the Montlake phase. So one of the kind of subtle tweaks that we've made here, knowing that there wasn't really anything we could do about having that parallelogram shape project outward towards the trail, was actually reflect that in the configuration of that little niche seating area. So it is a little inverted. It's a little different, but it is picking up on that same design language and reinterpreting it. We also were able to expand that planting area that's supporting one of the specimen trees ever so slightly, about 8 square feet, but every square foot counts when we're trying to establish big, beautiful urban street trees. And there's a couple of views of what that space looks like. 10th Avenue, as we all know, is quite steep. So on the kind of the south end, there is a short stair that helps people take a quick shortcut to get access to the ramp. There's a more generous and graceful option to go through that outlook space. You can see that kind of inverted parallelogram form and the seat wall there and how that ties in. Also includes companion seating as part of that seating area. As we move down 10th a little bit more, there were some changes to this area. One of the things that was really nice in the baseline concept about the east side of 10th, north is to our right here, was that there was a raised portion where the bike lane actually came up to the sidewalk level and had separation from the roadway. Originally, the west side of the street did not have that. Just after this bus stop area, the bike lane actually went out onto the roadway. This is actually a great example of some of those touch points and advocacy and discussions with the community where that was something that I think, we heard back that why aren't we doing the same thing on the west side of the street? And so that's been incorporated into the design where we do maximize the area that we've got, that separated bike lane that follows the sidewalk, dumps out further to the south, similar to what's happening on the east side of the street. So a couple of views here, they're starting to show, this is the west portal. So the general area that we were just looking at, we've reoriented a little bit, but you can see the kind of the wide, generous sidewalk on either side, as well as the grading. We're berming up pretty much everywhere that we can. Again, maximizing the soil depths that we can get in these planter strips and in these planter areas for all the trees that will be planted here. More detailed look, plan view of that grading and the slopes there. And then, so you can see these heavy white dashed lines are actually indicating the extent of the lid structure itself. We're paying very close attention to all the soil depths there. They're in addition to, the technical requirements that we're following, just as designers, we want to be setting these trees up for success so that this will be a great, one day, a wonderful tree-lined street section where currently there are no trees along 10th here. So where we don't have sufficient soil volumes or we have limited surface area for those planter areas, we will have silvacells that will provide additional root zone area underneath the pavement. Those silvacells are, stacked structures that help to support the pavement without having to compact all that soil. So there is looser soil that the tree roots can grow into and helps with water and oxygen exchange as well. So looking at the west portal, want to highlight some of the elements here. So we already talked about wall 2W that kind of comes around. It maintains that 10-to-1 batter and see that subtle transition that batter carries through until it intersects with the vertical face. As we work our way around from south to north here, the face of the barrier kind of parapet of the structure continues that same 10-to-1 batter. So it'll be a smooth face all the way across. This will have that Montlake ledge finish, the subtle ledges that protrude outward. The two sides of the pier here will have, those girders are at a slightly different angle. So that transition occurs right here. There will be a slight angle break at the bottom. However, at the top, there will be a generous 50-foot radius that smooths that out. So it will be a very subtle transition that change in angle from the actual superstructure, almost imperceptible at the top edge so that it has a cleaner appearance. We've also worked very closely to calibrate the soil depths on the backside of this parapet so that we have a very consistent kind of datum line that does slope, but maintains a consistent height, overall height to that barrier. It's not undulating in any way. And then this is kind of a roadway level view of what that will look like. We do have cylindrical columns supporting the bridge. At the pier cap, we're taking that pier cap shape and extruding that vertically up. That helps conceal the transition between those outermost girders Similar thing happens on the east portal as well. Just trying to keep, minimize the amount of different kinds of geometry or shapes that are introduced there. You keep that clean. You do see in the distance that there's a step between the two structures. So there's one lid structure supporting 10th Avenue and then a separate structure there under the balance of the Roanoke lid. And then
I'll stand on this side because unlike Brendan and Bradley, I care about you people over here.
That's rough.
You can go to the next slide, Brendan. So we're talking about now the Fire Life Safety Building. This, as the name suggests, it's an unoccupied building. People don't work there, don't spend any time there. This is just for the fire equipment for under the lid structure. Sits at the corner of Roanoke and 10th. So these are the initial concept diagrams, concept design. You should all be familiar with. They've been around for a few years now. One thing to point out in this, one of the reasons for the sort of location and shape of the building, there are some significant constraints. Because of the nature of the equipment inside, you need to be able to get a pretty good sized truck in and out of the building. So that is that created the front yard and the large concrete area in the front. You can see through these diagrams here, the blue lines are for a truck to be able to pull off the road and back in to the building to be able to get out and get in large equipment. So that sort of delineated the shape. We tried from this stage moving forward, we made the building slightly smaller. Once we knew what equipment was going inside, things like that, we tried to get it as small as possible and minimize the impact of it. You can go to the next slide now. So here's a site plan of that area. The yard consists of a parking space again there's a rolling door here to be able to get equipment in and out. There's a fairly sizable generator that's needed to support the equipment and a transformer out here with a parking space as well for any maintenance people or anyone that has to come to this building during an event or so on. You can sort of see, as Brendan talked before, this is the landscaping that sort of wraps around. It starts to terrace along with the building here at the corner of 10th and Roanoke and wrap around slightly to get some landscaping there, as well as between the fire station and the building itself. Go to the next slide. Just a quick floor plan, just to let everyone know so this valve room, this is for all the fire equipment that is for the underlid system, a supporting electrical room to support all that equipment, and a control room to be able to come in and monitor and work this in an event. So that's basically all that's inside this building. It's not meant to be occupied except for an event or for maintenance. So it's just an equipment building. You can go to the next slide. So here you can see, so what we tried to do with the materials, with the massing, color scheme, is really try to get it to talk to the fire station next door, feel as much a part of the same structure and same lot as possible, not introducing something new and different. So we use the same brick. We use a combination of brick, concrete, grayish colors to again match the same language as the fire station next door. And there you can also see the stepped planters that go along and connect to the landscaping. Go to the next slide. So this is that front view, and I understand the noises that were made. Again, this is mostly because of the need for access and what is actually happening with this building. We tried to minimize that as much as possible. We have the fence that is now, I think you guys saw a previous version where the fence was a little bit lower. You could see the equipment behind. We've made sure that the equipment in the yard is blocked. This is a decorative fence. You'll see in another slide the decorative pattern for that metal fence. But again, besides the metal fence, using the same brick as the building, using concrete elements similar to what's going on at the fire station. That is a requirement to block the transformer that is parked out there in front as well. So we can go to the next slide. This is the corner from 10th. Again, same thing. Trying to minimize the massing of the building as much as possible. We're at the lowest ceiling height levels we can get for the size of equipment that's in there. So again, as much as possible to break up the massing a bit and to keep it as small and as low as possible. So this is a new piece since the last one. The main technical requirements required that the fence wrap around and terminate here at the 7W wall. We are looking at the idea, it feels a bit unfinished and you can see more of the building, so forth. So we are looking at the possibility of wrapping the fence around the building and sort of finishing that space off. It's very tight between the building and the wall, so it doesn't lend itself a lot to, and there's also a pretty significant slope between the building and the wall. So getting planting and things back there would be a little bit difficult. So we're looking at this option of bringing the fence around and would like some input on that moving forward. And I think we have one more slide. Here again, just showing the materials. Brick to match the the fire station next door. This tree pattern perforated metal panel fence that wraps the front, and then keeping the same sort of vertical language of the fence, but making it a little less fussy than the fence. It's a different material. The fence is meant to be slightly see-through. So the idea of the trees, but the concrete pattern is just a simple vertical pattern to give some texture to the concrete. And that's these two walls here. That is the fire life safety building.
Jump back up and circle around to kind of the last piece here, talking a little bit about the east portal wall. I'll try to be gracious to everybody on the side of the room as well. So this is kind of so we looked a little bit before we touched on the fire life safety building at the west portal. This is the east portal on the other side. Kind of one significant thing that's different about this is that the lid structure actually makes a jog here. We still have the same design language, those portal walls, that 10-to-1 batter that flares outward and kind of disappears off into the landscape on the side of the roadway. But there's a couple of refinements in this space as well. So at this inside re-entrant corner, that's been rounded off. So it has a subtle radius that actually helps with, it's more of a structural item, but helps, where you have this kind of sharp corner that would be, have an issue in terms of the reinforcement and all the rest. So rounding that helps with the stability and kind of longevity of the structure there. And then where it comes to this sharper point that projects outward, we're just acknowledging that point rather than try to round that or actually create that into a more of a fussier form. It just honors kind of that geometry of that battered parapet coming together at a point there. That also helps to line up with that pure cap element. Again, I mentioned on the west side, just having the kind of the full width or extent of that pure cap extend up through the diaphragm that's encapsulating the girder and kind of beam ends through there. Quick look at the grading through this space. So This is the Bagley viewpoint is currently over in this general vicinity. That's going to be rebuilt. Those same actual cobblestones that are out there today are going to be salvaged and reused as part of this viewpoint. So we're keeping that material. This is that same design language, that parallelogram for all those outlooks I mentioned earlier. But that element there, right next to the Bagley stairs, we looked at that seat wall and the slopes a moment ago. And then when we look at the next slide, this starts to look at the soil cover. Again, a number of trees through this area, ensuring that we've got sufficient soil depth coverage for those. And then at the Bagley outlook itself, that same design language, that lean rail element that helps to frame in that space. In this case, we don't have, a fall zone on the other side, so it's not technically acting as a guardrail, which allows us to keep that area below the lean rail more open. Just stanchions and posts supporting that. And then you can see how the grading, kind of works with the overall slope of the structure below, and then also where that parapet element gets set below that viewpoint. So it does afford a good view out for anybody standing or sitting in that space. Similar to what we saw at the west portal, where the height of the wall is in part driven by the soil depths beyond, trying to keep that as a relatively consistent datum line, because the kind of the south portion of the structure does project further westward. There, it will ultimately be a little bit shorter along that face. The transition to a slightly taller barrier where we're further back will occur just within that section that's not really oriented towards anybody traveling, the traveling public on the highway below. You can also see that that pier cap condition that extended all the way up as part of the diaphragm. That covers the just our journey kind of around the Roanoke lid, as well as for the streetscapes and the fire life safety building. So it's kind of our next pause for clarifying questions, comments, and discussion, and then we'll pick back up with the Roanoke open space brief.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly a variety of topics in this section, right? Del Mar, Harbor, Olympic ramp, and then the fire and life safety building. I think we'd like to open it up to comments from the general public. If anybody has any, we would love you to limit your comments to 2 minutes, focused on these 4 sections. Reminder, we had an opportunity to talk about the bridge previously, and we will have an opportunity to talk about the Roanoke open space coming up. So 2 minutes available to anybody who's interested.
And then I'll just note that we did get some comments, and the commissioners have copies of it and have read it from Jim Simpkins and from Ann Knight, who I think couldn't make it today. But there are a couple of other people in the room and online. So let me just say we'll take the comments in the room first, and anyone online, you have a few minutes to find the raised hand symbol, which is along the top of your screen if you want to make a comment.
I'm representing a group. I have like 3 minutes and 40 seconds.
That's fine.
I'm sorry to do this. I know you've got a lot going on here. Yeah. My name is Jim Simpkins, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Roanoke Park Historic District. We submitted written comments with concerns and recommendations, and I have a few copies of them when we'd like them. First, I'd like to thank the commission for allowing us to comment, and I'd also like to thank all the people at Skanska and WashDOT who I know have been working behind the scenes to improve the design of the fire life safety building. And one more thing, we don't have the engineering or design expertise that WashDOT and Skanska do, so we won't make any specific recommendations about exactly what to do or how to do it. Having said that, we're here commenting today because something's just got to be done about the proposed structure at 10th and Roanoke, and something more than just a few superficial design tweaks. I haven't been to a design commission meeting before, so I looked at the 6 values by which projects are evaluated by the commission. I can't speak to the last one, which concerns cost effectiveness, but the proposed fire life safety building and service yard violates every one of the first 5 values: inspired design, contextual integration, innovative sustainability, social inclusion, and exemplary partnerships. Instead, the design projects, I wonder if you could put up the view from Roanoke Street, certainly. The one that got the reaction. That was good. Yeah, there it is. So that we've got kind of the building and then that fence wrapping around it. Instead, the design projects its ugly backside to an Olmsted Park, a historic district, and the larger neighborhood. People who have spent decades planting trees, pruning shrubs, weeding, painting over graffiti, and who have managed to create a beautiful environment in the midst of what would otherwise be a bland urban transportation nexus. As for public outreach, the fact that the elevations and perspective drawings were not shared either at public meetings or as part of the Section 106 process until March 11th is troubling. And it's further reason that citizens have to rely on the Design Commission to send this back to the drawing board for more consideration. It's not our intention to delay the project or add to its cost, but when all the designers and engineers and construction workers have moved on, my neighbors and I have to live with what has been done. As I understand it, the very purpose of the commission is to help prevent a design as deeply flawed as this one going forward. Let me highlight just one issue, landscaping. The drawings show the entire site, which has been a lawn since 1963, being paved over. The reason seems to be so that large trucks servicing the facility can enter and exit and turn around without difficulty. From WashDOT's perspective, that's nice, but what's the trade-off between WashDOT's convenience and the facility's integration into its surroundings? Compare that to the award-winning fire station next door, which has 6 mature columnar trees in front, planted in a 10-foot wide garden bed that runs the full length of the building. Plus, the building has a full width parking strip that includes, among other plantings, a mature sycamore tree. Part of integrating a building, even a beautiful one like Fire Station 22, into its surroundings is designing that integration from the start. If WashDOT has to access its site with smaller trucks than it would prefer, or occasionally make use of a flag around Roanoke Street because it has echoed that Fire Station 10-foot wide planter and full parking strip, well, that could be a sensible trade-off. But again, our job isn't to design. Skanska and WashDOT have been entrusted with that responsibility. But if there's ever been a design that needs some more consideration of integrating with its surroundings before it moves forward, it's this proposed fire safety bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Is there somebody else?
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah, we're gonna stay in the room and then we'll get to online and following, so.
My name is Marty Leibowitz. I'm an architect in the city. I've been for 60 years. I live 200 feet from this building. And I've moved to this neighborhood to enjoy it. I'm saying this as an architect, though, not as a NIMBY person saying I don't want this next to my house. So I'll just read what I wrote. The building located in architecture, both the location and architecture are terrible. It looks like a bad sewage treatment pump building, crowning a beautiful billion-dollar loop. The original site drawings and elevations that the entire city reviewed and improved reserved the lip space for a landscape park. The building appears to be an emergency pump structure with an emergency generator, mechanical room, etc. From my experience, most of these spaces can be relocated below grade. And my experience comes from the Renton sewage treatment plant, the Triangle Garage in the UW, and multiple projects, MRI building at Group Health, which were all relocated below grade to accommodate the aesthetics of the neighborhoods. The existing adjacent building at the site, Fire Station 20, is a LEED certified platinum building. Not only is it a beautiful building, but it's a unique building in the United States of America. There aren't many LEED certified platinum buildings. If we're ultimately convinced that the new station must be above grade, then it should complement the fire station. Fire Station 20 architecture. This proposal does the opposite. Additionally, large emergency generators and pumps can be very loud when running. The 520 lid project is a noise mitigation project. Why would we locate this type of building above the lid rather than under it? What I suggest is the following. I already spoke about relocating all or part of it below grade or somewhere else. If the building cannot be relocated, it should be either totally or partially be placed underground or burned. Lastly, if any building structure is necessary above ground in this location, a prominent Seattle design firm should be commissioned for the building skin and the building itself. The recommendation, I have 10 seconds. My recommendations are Weinstein Architects, Miller Hall, who's done similar work, and Olson Sumner Kunde. Each of these architects has experience with this type of project. They would quickly analyze the problem, present architectural solutions that complement Fire Station 20, and respect the historical Roanoke neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, Marty.
Can I wait until they're on?
Yeah. We want that as well.
And we did catch all of your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
I work in the theater as a profession. This is our worst nightmare. Oh, no, not count. My name is Spider Kadelsky. I live in the neighborhood. I will echo some of the things that Mr. Simpkins and Mr. Leibowitz have all already said. If you don't know that corner of 10th and Roanoke, it is a heavily trafficked every day. By cars, by people. They will be looking at that building because it is right inside whatever direction you're going in. People are going to Interlochen Park, to the freeway, to Capitol Hill, to the university, right there at that junction. As we mentioned, it will stand in stark contrast to the beautiful now neighborhood landmark, Weinstein AU Fire Station. It does nothing, with all due respect, sir, it does nothing to complement the building. It does more to detract from that beautiful building. And now, and forgive this harsh language, this is a clear insult to our community, this building. I consider it an afterthought, no aesthetic responsibility to the public at all. None of us are expecting IMP or Walter Gropius, but we do deserve some respect and a modicum of appealing industrial design. Our neighborhood has to endure 6 years of this entire project. Obstructions on many of our streets, loss of our mature trees, a huge increase in truck traffic, awful sounds of construction. Right now, I'm driving every day, several times a day. I can't comment on the rest of the 520 project, but this building with no visual merit, I can see it, and I think many of the community members see it as a screw you to our community. One that we will have to live with for many years to come. Lewis Sullivan, the architect, postulated form follows function. His intention was not to say function without any form. That is what this building presents to our community. Thank you all for being here, and of course, thank you to the people from Washtenaw for their very, very hard work. We all look forward 6 years from now and seeing this project completed, but with a much, much more appealing solution to the fire and safety issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Spider.
Okay, and we have Kyle Capizzi online.
Hello?
Kyle, could you try that again, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
This is Kyle Capizzi. I'm on the board of the Friends of Seattle's Olmsted Parks and also personally live up the hill from 10th Avenue. My experience in moving through that space now is an open space around what is proposed for the FLS building. My son goes to Tops Elementary across the freeway, already has to move through fairly industrial space going over the freeway, and now will experience the same thing walking around that corner. Seems to be an oversight that you have created beautiful space all around this and have completely cut off that experience on this corner. I'll refer you also to Ann Knight's comments, I think, well articulated around the use of the building and the suggestion for analyzing efficiencies to reduce the footprint, the volume, and the height to help reduce that impact and view blockage should that building have to remain. The necessary changes are not easily accomplished, but I think outlining both option 1 and option 2 in Ann's comments that have been given to the commissioners is certainly a consideration, primarily around that SCL transformer vault, as everyone groaned when they saw those big yellow columns and such. We need to look at a better option. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyle. Is there anyone else online?
I don't see any more hands.
Great.
Can I make a comment in the room?
Yes.
I'm from the Roanoke neighborhood. I'm a historian. My name's Lee O'Connor, and I just want to say I would love to see the design massaged to just be a little gentler when you're in the park, and because that's the view you get from that side of the park.
Thank you.
Just one last comment. Okay. You know what? I've been an architect for a long time. I worked in group health. And a lot of times where we had industrial stuff happen, we created a design team, which in the case of the 15th Avenue group health building, we had the design architect hire Arthur Erickson to do the facade of the building, to clad it. In the case of our Tacoma Specialty Center, we did the same, and we said you have to hire Miller Hull to do the building. We don't care about, and in the case of our Capitol Hill things, they said an MRI had to be on the 3rd floor, and we said it's too far from the emergency room. So they agreed to bury it underground, even though initially they said MRIs could never be underground. So I think the idea of creating a design team and saying this is a unique thing. It's not building a sewage treatment plant. It's not building a bridge. Hire a great architect to be part of your team and let them understand the problem. And they are problem solvers. That's what an architect is, a puzzle solver. They'll throw out things you may or may not like, but as a team, you probably will come up with a good solution.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and for the documents that you had sent previously. I think at this point, I think we should shift into questions from commissioners to the design team. And again, remember that we're focusing on those 4 distinct areas that we just saw. Anyone have questions?
Actually, I do. Clarifying what the materials I'm seeing here, I see the brick, which is also flags the corner. I'm seeing a concrete wall that's about 4 feet high, I estimate, but maybe it's 6. And then I'm seeing actually the metal fencing. I don't quite understand what that what that is. If you could describe it a little bit. I was looking at the documents, but if I could just have a sort of verbal description.
Yeah, so it's a metal perforated panel with a custom design, as you can see, inspired by the tree image below.
Okay.
So it's perforated metal panel.
And how tall is that?
That's 9 feet.
9 feet. And is the concrete wall about 6 feet?
Yes. And those are, so the fence originally was 8 foot, but you were able to see the generator peek up behind it. So that's the reason that the fence is now 9 foot. And the concrete walls are pretty much requirements for the transformer as well as the yellow bollards.
Thank you.
I had a question related to the Delmar shared use path connector. So I know that we had talked about this a bit in subcommittee. I am curious, recall that one of the conversations was about whether those columns could walk underneath the path itself. Is that something that's been explored, or is that something for the next?
That is something for the next. Yeah, it's something that we are continuing to look into. But yeah.
Just wanted to make sure now that we've looked at it together.
Yes.
My question kind of related is that I know you mentioned accessibility a couple of times, and also the fact that it, the ramp at some points follows the natural slope of the environment. Is the path accessible?
This path is
overall?
fully
Okay.
accessible. Yes, it's the, let's see. Few slides in here for me to be at the beginning. So I'll use my cursor here. So really within this zone, the portion of East Roanoke Street, the lower portion there is incredibly steep and challenging. So that sidewalk will follow the natural grade. And then this pathway that kind of comes off of the sidewalk and cuts across the lawn has some portions that are over 5%. So this is not an accessible route or part of the accessible route, given that it's leading to that short flight of stairs. And then the portion along 11th Avenue is also following the roadway grade. So it is above 5%, but still qualifies as part of an accessible pedestrian access route. The areas, I think we'll see it a little bit. There's probably another graphic a little further along, but it's the areas along 10th and also kind of, if you see this row of trees along East Roanoke Street, that zone is also following the roadway grade over 5%.
On the street side.
Well, yeah, on the south side of the street.
Could you go back one slide, maybe? Oh, the one that had the 3D view, the bird's eye
yeah,
view.
this one.
Correct. For any of those walls, has there been any thought of maybe working with a local artist for any like mural opportunity, or is that even a thought that's ever been explored?
So the wall texture that is being employed here, we did bring in Murasaka to help inspire that design. It's part of the element of continuity. But no murals.
Thank you.
I think I have a question generally about bike paths and switchbacks and tight radiuses. I'm not familiar with cycling, but I know that there are guidelines for downhill, uphill biking around corners. What is the sort of the minimum radius that somebody can stay on a bike and continue to go around a corner? What is that in design world?
Don't have that number on top of my
So
head.
the geometry that's depicted here is very tight, but it does meet the state's minimum standards for inside radius for the shared use map.
But we had switchback on the other, I missed this question previously, but we had a switchback on the earlier section where it was a very tight, not only this switchback here, but At the other side of the bridge, there's a very tight switchback. And those also meet this minimum radius, or are those mountable?
Are you talking about as it meets Del Mar drawings?
Cycling path, this is a major cycling path. I'm just trying to figure out what our minimums are on the whole journey. So that you don't have to get off your bike and walk it around a corner repeatedly.
This should be the only significant pinch point where we have a sharp switchback of any kind.
Yeah.
And that's driven by a number of spatial constraints, including property boundaries, right-of-way boundaries, and the slopes involved going down the slope between Del Mar and Boyer. So that was the driving constraint in addition to from the top of 10th down to Boyer and down to the water's edge. We have about 190 feet of grade change that we're trying to thread the needle and get the best possible accessible route from top to bottom. And you can see at one point, just in particular, and I think perhaps one of the views we looked at before, if you see that shaded zone and that dashed line, that's representing the edge of the right of way and the spatial constraints we have to operate in. We are coming relatively close to that point. So we really are maximizing what we can do within the space we have available to negotiate that grade change through.
And just a quick follow-up question, Brian, this I think is a great question. I mean, I have actually gone down when I've been biking on a really tight radii. It's not a great feeling. But you know, I understand the design constraints within which you're working. I've had the same question about sight lines. So that's the other thing about a tight turning radii is you want to make sure you can see, particularly if you're going uphill, who's coming downhill. I presume those sight lines will all be very open and you'll be able to see what's coming.
Yeah.
Either way, either direction.
Do you think this is a striped? So people don't cut the corner and run over somebody coming the other direction or something?
Currently, this is not striped, which is consistent with the 520 trail as it crosses.
The caveat is we're leaving that to the final designer as far as what is the city resolution, channelization, signing.
Can you clarify that comment? Who is the final designer and is this not the final design team?
So we do stripe by Mott Lake in 24. We did stripe that because there's a lot of geometry there. Private center stripe, stripe to define.
Yeah.
I would imagine if I'm a final designer, there would probably be a stripe down the center here. If not other markings as well. Okay.
While we're on the topic of bike design, on 10th, you were talking about going on 10th, and you mentioned some of the design modifications you made based on community comment, I think. Just here, how are you working with the city on all that streetscape design and coordination? I imagine there's a lot of ongoing coordination, but specifically there, since you're in presumably the city right of way, I think
yes,
part of that. So how are you coordinating?
We have weekly meetings with multiple stakeholders and Seattle Parks and Rec and Seattle Department of Transportation are both attendees at those meetings. So
Parks and Rec because of the Homestead.
Yes. So the immediate streetscape area is obviously within SDOT right of way jurisdiction and then the parks. But the goal, of course, being across these agencies and stakeholders that we are all at the same table discussing all of these things so that there's a unified approach.
Just staying with this area, you had mentioned that this was the trailhead a couple times. I wonder, why do you choose that sort of mid-block beginning of the switchback as your trailhead, and how does it? Maybe we're going to talk about its connection throughout the park and to Harvard Bike in the next section. Is that where we just at? Why do you use that terminology specifically as trailhead?
This is for anyone traveling along BSR 520 trail, really heading from east to west. As we get beyond the Mon Lake connection area, this is the first opportunity on west of Portage Bay to make a decision on where you're going to go. Basically from that Bill Dawson connector bridge that we saw in the first segment that comes up and ties into the Portage Bay Bridge South. As you're coming across Portage Bay, this is where you get to a point where you can decide, am I going to go straight across and go into the Roanoke open space? Am I going to hang a right and go up towards Roanoke District? Or am I going to hang a left and go down towards Interline? So this is really the first decision point as you're arriving to this site of Portage Bay.
And that comes with signage and.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
description
it's the
and-
point where that trail actually starts on this end of the project.
I'd love to sort of button up this area. Does anybody else have questions on this section?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Question.
Can we go to the second section about the Harvard Olympic area?
May I just make one very brief comment again about the fire and safety building? It's a project that calls out not only for architectural input, but it calls out for the input of visual artists or artists to present them with this building, whatever its final determination is, to make it something that's visually really appealing. Not necessarily architects or engineers or other designers can achieve that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Spider. Thank you. We are going to continue with our Q&As here though. To me, I had a couple questions about this area. If I could maybe plant a seed. We do have an overlook that seems to be right in front of a bunch of trees. I certainly love the trees more than I think I love that overlook. How do those two go together?
So one of the things as the design, comes together and is refined is that we'll be prioritizing that view shed out from the overlook. So this is not necessarily the final location of these trees meant to convey the general massing through that area. We do have, let's see, that is about a 20-foot, roughly 16 to 20-foot grade change from the overlook down to the lower portion. So the trees directly in front of that space would be intentionally selected to have a lower stature rather than, that's not the place for the massive spectacular oak. So we will be carefully looking at the plan selection. That's one of the things that'll come up in our next series of workshops and presentations. But yeah, so we will be prioritizing that view out so that the entire purpose of that space being is to celebrate the view of the Olympics beyond. We want to do that.
And that specific corner is where we have the established tree already, right?
No, there is no.
Just a specimen.
Yeah, there will be a specimen tree planted above.
Specimen is
New one, yes.
Excuse me. Thank you. Any other questions on Harvard? I had another one then. We looked at wall 2W and the west portal wall. I think asked this previously, but if we're pressing underneath that west portal wall, there's another wall halfway through the park. Is that a similar, that wall that you can see underneath the first span? Is that a similar architecturally expressed wall with the pattern and
that particular wall? No. That's going to be set back considerably from the opening. So that as that wall kind of comes down, it's not meant to draw attention to itself per se. It's going to be back in the shadows. There will be, of course, ample underbridge lighting through that space, but that is meant to be to not draw attention to itself. We want the actual outer portal to really.
Can you highlight over the portion of wall you referring to?
Yeah.
That next step, it's like you're underneath the stairs and you see the next tread down.
Brendan, isn't that actually the girder face?
Yeah, no, there is a wall here.
And on the left, it's the wall of we step down into the park adjacent, and that is a wall that's visible to the park side as a expressed architectural wall. And it is visible on this side to vehicles, and it's on the right, I think it's 15 feet tall. On the left, it's much less.
Correct.
So it's a pretty substantial.
And the pattern is applied on the wall that it's perpendicular to, is that correct?
It's that'll be it. Yes, in front, in the foreground, those walls will have that Montlake ledge pattern.
So the one's parallel to it in front of it, but the wall's perpendicular to that. So the
Oh,
ones that
yes,
are
sorry, the ones
alongside it
along the
have-
roadway, those will be smooth.
The abutment walls are smooth. The finished walls on the opening are textured.
Correct, yes.
You want to follow up with that at all?
I don't have another question.
Okay.
Talk about it. Discussion section. I did have one other portal question.
Yep.
Has the team done any refinement? So Brendan, you talked about the angle of the wall, as well as the corbel portion and girder portion. I'm curious if there's been, I recall that there was a wall beneath those and it's turned into the rounded columns. And I'm curious if, since our last conversation, there's been any refinement to that edge as it relates to the column.
Specifically as it relates to the column, I'm trying to get back to that view. We'll look at together here. Give me 1 second, slideshow kicking me out. So this will look like this. So you're, okay, so.
The bridge pier.
Yeah, the bridge pier here in the center here. So, so the first piece of that is rather than, so there's the pier cap.
And this is the west. So I guess it happens on both the west.
It does happen on both sides. Yeah, there's slightly different. This at least is a kind of a consistent face. The difference on the east side is that there's that back, that kind of zigzag to the edge of the structure. But we are trying to carry the same, language through from kind of the roadway level on up to the base of that parapet. So opening up the columns, there's, an aspect of just kind of the permeability from one side of the roadway to the other, right? And kind of the open airflow there as well. We do have those cylindrical columns that come up and support that pier cap. That's continuous, and then there's a directly above the pier cap itself. You almost can't tell because it's the same volume in this view, but there is the term is the diaphragm that's basically encapsulating the end of those the beams that span across, and so we're keeping the full extent, the full width of that pier cap all the way up through the diaphragm. Oftentimes you'll see that kind of step back because it doesn't necessarily have to be that full width in terms of its function, but in this case, it's kind of, maintaining not drawing attention to itself, keep that simple. We want to just bring that volume all the way through. Also helps to break up kind of visually that kink between the two different angles of the girders, specifically on this end for the 10th Avenue lid that is obviously it's generally maintaining the slope of 10th Avenue, which is quite steep as it's going up. Rather than.
Yeah, and on the east portal, I think it's 132. We had, I don't know, we talked about it in the workshop, but there was at one time this kind of stair step in the pier cap, and there was a bit of a ledge and a stair step, right? So we've actually created this flush face and tried to get all of that to line up so that we're not creating any roosting ledges or anything like that, just trying to create as smooth and clean a transition from the parapet wall down to that cap.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, we're pretty much 20 minutes behind schedule, so from now on, the question is, do we think we can do it? Can we get to comments?
I think we need to get to FLS.
For sure, I agree.
Do we have any questions about FLS? Or do we jump right
Have
into it?
vegetation opportunities been explored?
that's my
As
question.
quickly as you can answer that, have vegetation options been explored in the building? And
Not just that, is a clarification to adding to that, is there a planting strip along that's not clear? It seems that it's not.
There is not a planter strip at the backside of the curb through there because of the turning movements involved. There's quite a wide driveway apron. to support,
And then
that.
the rest of this question, and just the rest of landscaping.
Yeah, and again, it's largely driven by those access constraints along the north face along East Roanoke there that is precluding the ability to really introduce substantial landscape in its current configuration.
Is the massing that you inherited causing this transportation issue? Is there something we can do to solve that parking movement with changing the massing to the building? I understand that you guys have inherited some parts of this.
I believe that, go to the diagram from the concept design.
I think what, from kind of a overarching urban design perspective, when we initially started, there was a question, just within the design team of, can we reorient the building and open up the corner more? So that you actually open up some sight lines. And what we realized when we started kind of looking into that, is that the current orientation is trying to do its best to conceal that yard, right? Rather, if we were to kind of mirror or flip the orientation of that building, that whole service yard area ends up happening at the corner, right at the intersection. And so the orientation of the building, kind of shifting that over, keeps that kind of the most utilitarian part of the layout tucked away. It's not, a tremendous difference, but it helps considerably in at least having that be oriented alongside the access drive to the fire station.
And I believe the other reason for building location and configuration is, I think it was looked at whether basically, one of the comments was that the backyard is in the front. That switching it over, I think it was looked at to see if you could enter the truck off of 10th. But the grade sloping there is too extreme to be able to enter from that side and the bus stop. And so it really had to enter off of Roanoke. And again, the grade, can't get too close to the corner as well. So that really drove, I believe, the final location of the building.
I believe there's some clear commentary on this, but are there any further questions?
Just one last question just about, so I see a tree ghosted in the render, you see the ghosted tree in that diagram. That doesn't really exist, does it?
It doesn't.
Okay.
And the reason being that is right at the edge.
Yeah.
That's just to the west beyond, that's the driveway aisle for the fire station. So having something there that.
Yeah, but you do have a green strip there in the render, or it doesn't exist.
There is
So it's all paved.
There should be a slight green strip through there, but it's not wide enough to support a tree and also deal with the large vehicles that need access in and out.
And then the last one is about the render. There are showing evergreens in the back beyond kind of where they are in the existing condition too. Are those plantable or no?
We're still looking into what we can do back there. There is an element of kind of the service yard and some electrical equipment in that corner. That's certainly our goal, but not confirmed what we can do in that space.
Okay, one more question. I heard this come up in a lot of other comments, so I'll make sure to put it forward. Are there any components that, again, I know that this was handed to your team. Are there any components that could be pushed underground compared to what was handed to you?
I believe technically, yes, pieces of it could be put underground. But that hasn't been explored so far.
I have a final question, I think. Has public art been considered? Is that building?
Yes, in great detail at this time, no, but this is one of the potential areas that clearly would benefit from a public art component, and there is space potentially primarily along 10th Avenue that would lend itself to an art installation in one form or another.
Ben, I want to check in with you if you have any questions.
No questions. I'm ready for commentary though, whenever you guys are.
Okay. I would love to shift to commentary. Reminder, we are behind. I think some of this is rather clear. So Ben, Architect Commissioner, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, on the fire life safety building, I tend to agree with the commentary that the online commentary or the public made. I feel like I understand the constraints of the site and the access and everything. I just feel like there's a much better architectural solution available and than just sort of what it is right now. And I would like to see it more. I think, you know, I'm looking at the Fire Station 22 right adjacent to it. And I think even just the rhythm, there's tons of ways of doing it. I'm not going to suggest a solution, but I think if you get a good architect involved, there should be a better solution that provides a more meaningful sort of corner anchor for that site. And it's such a great project overall. I just feel like that would be an unfortunate solution the way it's currently designed.
I think I'd agree with that. I'm taking that this overall project is really a living beautification process, and I fully understand that the preliminary design really focused on the lid and the park and the trails, and that this FLS building perhaps was a technical requirement of the lid that was not given as much attention to. And I think I'm going to be pretty strong in encouraging that this is seen as a technical requirement to the lid, but not as letter of the law line item restriction to the current design team. And very much interested in dramatic alternatives. Because I think life safety is important, but perhaps not this way.
Yeah, this is a case where I do actually think, like, I don't always like when people say like, oh, at planting and that will solve problems, but I actually do think in this scenario that if you look at the consistency across the front of the fire station, and I don't mean just adding planting, and I personally actually don't think the existing condition is anything of a benefit. You know, it's not particular benefit to the neighborhoods. I disagree with the commentary on that part. It just feels like vestigial space. So I think making this better should always be, like, you go with your idea of like this is a beautification project. This should always be like augmenting a space, augmenting the neighborhood, bringing something better. I do think the project is trying to tie into the existing fire station. And I think if you look at that, there is, you know, not that it's 100% there, but I do think with that notion in mind, and trying to make that feel like one contiguous space and project. If we could diminish the scale of this building per the point of being able to put something underground, if that could be re-explored so that the scale could be shrunken, then the relook at how that organization, the massing is following, relating to the existing fire station, and then bringing across the landscape. That's back to my point about the landscape, is like looking at as that as a cue and enshrouding that space and something that feels like it's a composite of that whole, that whole corner. And I think, you know, I do think it's one-sided to only be talking about it, how it feels from across, like looking across from the park, right? A park is in an urban context. Parks are that breathing room that don't necessarily need to have another park across the street, right? Like a park is a park and you live in an urban space. So like having development here is acceptable. Like, you know, it's a back of house development that needs some love.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, I think as came across the public comment is what's really striking to me about this whole presentation, and kudos to WashDOT and the design team, you're really creating striking public spaces all through here, you know, the overlooks and the trail enhancements. You know, so A plus, you know, on most of it. This is sort of the glaring sort of exception to that. I'm very familiar with this intersection. It's very heavily traveled now. I think it will be more traveled in the future by hopefully pedestrians and cyclists, which I think that's the goal here, right? And so I think that speaks even more to any design modification that can happen here to make it a, you know, better design, gentler space, less declining space. And I know you inherited a lot of this, and so I understand, but I think that it's a reasonable request from the community, and I hope there's more.
Yeah, and there are a lot of great examples of really very utilitarian buildings kind of being created as almost like public art. You know, I'm kind of thinking, I'm not suggesting this is a solution here, but I'm thinking of the venting towers for the tunnel underneath the viaduct or the viaduct tunnel. You know, that's one example. There's lots of other solutions, but I think this just feels like just a kind of a generic brick maintenance building that belongs in the back corner somewhere, not on the front corner of the site. So I think there's a lot of potential here to make it a more important place. Not sure if that's quite the right word, but you know. I also, Brian, I have to step off. I have another call I have to get ready for. So that'll be my final comment. And but thank you guys. It's a beautiful project, by the way. I think I'm excited to see this built. The overall project. I think this is just one part that needs some attention. Thank you.
I think I might, unless there's something very urgent, I might park additional commentary on this section so that we can skip into the next and final section.
So I will try to do this succinctly and briefly here. So I know we are short on time. The good news is that this area in particular will be the primary focus of our next workshop and our next presentation. So this will be on the briefer side, but we do want to cover a few key things and refinements that we've been working through. And of course, we're really excited to take an even deeper dive in our next series of touch points here. Fran, I'll let you start.
Yeah, again, this is the entire same family. They'll be seen on this entire in-depth project.
And more detail on that in the next series.
There's some more to come.
Yeah, and then a schematic view of where signs are located currently and pathways.
So this is really kind of the open space ends up being kind of the nexus of a lot of the connectivity. Again, the grade change is one of the elements that's driving a lot of this and creating this kind of long oval loop path that connects and ties into that tunnel that goes underneath 10th to connect out to the Harbor Trailhead. You can see that it's part of the connectivity out to the intersection of 10th and Roanoke there at the north end. Potential connections along 11th. Pretty steep there, so you better be good at biking if you're charging up that hill, but also a connection into the community, into the neighborhood, North Capitol Hill there, right at Federal with a small outlook and kind of stair access to them. So circulation areas, you can see where you see the orange and the blue, that's where we've got the combination of bicycle and pedestrian routes. The red is the primarily pedestrian access or stair routes. And then in terms of accessibility, this is the slide that is a little too farther down along, but these cyan areas, those are highlighting the areas around the open space where we are following the national grade of the roadways, and it's steep, but we are providing a consistent accessible route. That's the dark blue all the way through, including the switchback ramp at the Cascade Stair and ramp there in the southwestern corner. So real quick, touching on, I mentioned the grading challenges. So we are trying to make up and catch as much grade as we possibly can through this space. The color coding corresponds with the different levels of slopes. This is that kind of lower portion that we refer to as the Great Lawn path, because it is separate. It's not truly part of the shared use path itself. That portion, it's kind of your shortest distance. We've got, let's see, this is about 150, was it 25 feet of grade change just across this bottom lower area alone. So making up for that here through this lower portion. But we do have zones where the slope shallows up to be about 2%. That corresponds with where we have bench locations for users to pause at, and then along kind of the northern edge, that's where we've got the steepest slope charging upwards towards still under 5%, but heading towards that Roanoke gateway element, and then around as we get down towards that tunnel element. A couple aerial views to help us kind of orient. So this is a view looking from the southeast, or I guess actually almost due east, from the east. Fire Life Safety Building tucked right back here. And this gives you a really good view of that entrance from Del Mar, that path, the Great Lawn SUP that comes around, the tunnel underneath 10th there, and then the Cascade Stairs outlook and ramp corner there. So we're going to start down here along Del Mar and kind of work our way around counterclockwise through some of these elements. This is looking quickly at a slope analysis specifically of the Great Lawn area. You can see about 2/3 of that is on structure. These heavy white dashed lines are representing the edge of that structure. The central portion of the Great Lawn being the shallow slope, where people can gather, toss a frisbee, any kind of passive recreation there. This is showing a cover depth analysis, so you can see we're really leveling out that portion of the Great Lawn. We've got the deepest portion here where there's going to be, we'll be designing kind of the buildup of that full lid system to reduce weight, using lightweight infill material there, but still maintaining sufficient soil depth for all the trees and the lawn shrubs. So starting here at the Del Mar Gateway, really minor adjustments or refinements here. So one being that we've included the fact that there will be a set of removable bollards as part of that entrance. And then the biggest change really is that we've located a pair of benches here. Initially, there was an idea of having a bench along that incredibly steep, almost 12% portion that we saw along the bottom edge. Rather than trying to negotiate the kind of access to that, we've kind of set up a pair of benches here that's similar to another bench location on the west side of the Great Lawn. So just a quick view of that space. This is that Del Mar entrance, the Bagley Stair right over here. So this is a raised crossing that will allow people to come across, favorable for cyclists getting across, no curb ramps or changes there. There's a pair of seat walls as well as that kind of frame that entrance as well. As we wrap, again, counterclockwise up, we're approaching the kind of right along the transition from Roanoke to Del Mar. We do have a significant grade change through this area between the pathway and the sidewalk. So the refinement here largely being the kind of exactly where this wall falls, as well as extending it a little bit in either direction to help accommodate that grade change. Initially, the idea for this wall was that it would be a rock face wall or a dry stack rock wall, but given some of the constraints here, as well as technical requirements, kind of precluded the ability to actually do that when we got into the grade changes involved here. So that is evolved into a typical landscape wall that would have that adze pattern, that texture that we've seen throughout. So still picking up on the overall design language here. And again, having given the grade change, that will introduce a guardrail element where necessary along the top of this wall. One of the other benefits of using a kind of a typical concrete wall that we have here is that it does give more space back to those street trees that are set in between the wall and the sidewalk in this case. So this is just helping to indicate kind of those extents where we have different levels of fall protection needed. The bare minimum, of course, being at the full extent where there's more than a 30-inch fall. But you can also see where the wall height approaches some of the heights. Cover depth analysis, also one of the benefits of kind of the way that we've configured the wall, that we're maintaining sufficient cover for those trees where possible. Continuing a little bit further, so this is the Roanoke Gateway. This is that primary entrance that's right there at the intersection of 10th and Roanoke, directly catty corner, basically from Roanoke Park. So this area, some subtle refinements. We talked a little bit about how that wall we were just looking at extends a little bit further in. This is also the location of the single drinking fountain on the project. The wall on the other side also got extended through. You can get a sense this blue line is representing that edge of the structure below. So extending that wall a little bit through there helps us maintain some of the soil depth because we're able to retain a little bit more on the backside, particularly given that we have a specimen tree intended for that general location. One of the other refinements there, if we go back for a second, just in plan view, you'll notice that it's almost a little bit more open right there at the opening of the gateway, and that's due to a lot of grading adjustments and kind of refinements that we were making. We'll see on the next couple of slides. Try not to get too into it because I know we've got a lot to cover, but the general gist is for this last portion here, after we get off the lid structure itself, we are increasing the grade a little bit just so that we can pull the steep portion of that sidewalk back a little bit further and give level space back to the intersection. This is a place where people are going to land as they're coming down along 10th or coming off of the shared use path that's going around the Great Lawn. And we want to have ample space for people to, one, negotiate that corner if they need to, but also to queue up to cross, since there is a continuation of the bike circulation route that extends westward towards East Lake and over I-5 where that pedestrian bridge will be. So a couple more views kind of generally showing that. So really our constraint is the edge of the lid structure down below. And pretty much as we get a little bit beyond that, we start to have a slight angle break, steepen up that sidewalk ever so slightly, but overall improving that intersection and that gateway area. And then this is a view of that space. Continued refinements, of course, in the works, but you do have the kind of the ensemble of the various kind of design elements that are coming through, whether it's the paving patterns. We do have the seat walls with that adze pattern framing the entrance, that specimen tree intended to be a magnolia that will go in and be a part of that entrance. And then some of the continued refinements that you'll see next time related to the signage and kind of wayfinding elements at the entrance. So as we keep going along, I mentioned that one wall that we extended a little bit to improve the soil depth at the edge of the structure. Largely kept the wall alignment consistent. This is a really critical wall because we are dealing with the grade change from very steep slope along 10th to more or less level, at least relatively level, at the park, or excuse me, the open space level. And so what the main refinement here was that initially, if we go to the next slide, the concept was that this wall would actually have a series of steps to it, which would be a departure from a lot of the design language throughout. The intent was that it would provide more opportunities for kind of informal seating for people to perch upon, treat it like a seat wall. What we were able to do, working with the grades and also the berm, kind of separating the 10th Avenue from the open space, was to work out the kind of the northernmost portion, adjusting the top of wall grades to maximize almost 100 feet worth of seat wall height, plus or minus, anywhere from 16 to 24 inches in height. So within that comfort range to perch upon. And then continue that kind of gentle slope as that wall gets a little bit taller as the grade separation between the two structures increases as well. So overall, just kind of a blending in, tying together the overall design language and avoiding that extra step element. So you can see here just a look at the grading. The big difference here, of course, being that we do have a slope up, a gentle slope up from the edge of the path towards that wall where the informal seating will be on the northern portion. And then we're really trying to maximize the grades behind that wall to minimize how much of that transition between the two lid structures is visible and exposed. Cover depth analysis here, also very telling. This is where we get to the most separation between the lid structures, the most grade change between the two structure decks that we're working with. This starts to get into kind of the finer details. There was a question earlier about kind of the closure wall between the two lid structures. So this is kind of the outward facing side at the open space level. And so we've looked really closely at how we address this because they are two separate structures. There's a slight gap, 3-inch gap between the two of them that will have a compressible seal between them. But we're looking really closely at what the kind of the treatment of that top edge can be to minimize the visual and just kind of massing impact of that. On the far left, you see a graphic that we shared in our last presentation showing the modified planter curve at the raised planter for the Roanoke Trail crossing bridge. And so we're actually teasing out some of the key design elements that we've introduced there and bringing that back in over here. Namely that we have a cap piece and a reveal at the very top before starting that pattern finish. And so what we're doing is we're actually angling the top portion of the wall, almost like a coping element, so that it recedes back. There's less mass at the top edge, and then keeping that as a smooth face, a slight kind of cap piece before and reveal, and then getting to the rest of the finish. And then that plays out most importantly when we get to the edges. So where we go from that transition of being on structure to off structure, we're actually kind of thickening up the wall. That's this kind of on grade, off grade, or on structure, on grade line happens here, kind of in that same plane. So the wall 47 that's just off of the lid structure actually widens out, so there's a very seamless taper, but that kind of angled coping piece just blends back into the wall. I think the next graphic here will show that a little bit better. So you can see that angled face, and then right as we hit the joint between the on-grade on-structure, we transition smoothly back into just the single wall. Again, the goal really being to minimize the mass and width at the top so that it doesn't feel too overbearing or have extra residual space there. And we're carrying something similar through on the south side. It's different because we don't have a retaining condition by the time we get off the structure. So we're really just pulling that same kind of feature, that same profile all the way through and letting it gracefully kind of peter out right there at the edge. As we work our way down a little bit further, we have the cascade ramp and stairs. Generally, this similar layout, the principal parts being we have another outlook element. We have the stairs that lead down to the plaza. We also have this switchback ramp connection there. This is an important part of the accessible route that can get folks up to the outlook itself and also this southern portion of 10th Avenue. So we have roughly a 25-foot grade change through this space as well, so quite a lot. Some of the refinements that have been done, really just extending the ramps a little bit. Just again, those grading constraints and need to get a little extra run to make this all work. We are working through some refinements related to that community table there and grill that'll be at the bottom and part of that overall plaza. So we won't get too much into that today, but we do, I think the next slide covers some kind of an overall view of that. So you get a sense of that kind of the scale of the grade change from top to bottom. These ramps, it's a subtle thing that we're not highlighting per se, but one of the things we talked about at length in our recent workshop was kind of the visibility and the treatment, whether we add an extra railing type through this space. And when we actually took a closer look at that, adding in a more open, what we call our type 2 guardrail through there, we do have a kind of a grading constraints. Wasn't so bad. Really helps, and then we avoid having to try to wrap those walls around. We're chasing kind of a consistency element, but once we really dug into it, this worked out a lot better and opened up some of the sight lines into that switch back there. Speaking of the grading constraints, you can see what we're up against here. I mentioned the basically almost 25 feet of grade change. We do have a portion here at the kind of the southern limits where we're bumping up against that 2-to-1 slope, kind of maximum to get the grades to work out and also to be able to wrap them around these ramps, but trying to keep a 3-to-1 maximum, at least within kind of the primary spaces in between the ramp and the stair. A quick view of that. So you can see the 2 seat walls here in the foreground, part of that overlook. You can see that parallelogram, that lean rail element. We do have a fall condition, so this one does carry through the cable railing element. And see the next slide. Have a little bit more a real view of that rendered out. You'll note here there are areas of turf block as part of the pathway, helping to facilitate some of the maintenance vehicle access that's required. Zooming in on the community table here, this is something we've been refining. The kind of the layout in particular we've been working through. If we go to the next slide, we've got just some subtle refinements and adjustments to the size of that table that we're working through, including a companion seating on either side that can favor the views outward across the Great Lawn. So more to come on that. And then lastly, the federal outlook. So this is that connection, kind of a more intimate connection for the community, for the neighborhood. Kind of largely keeping the existing conditions through there. There are some potential changes afoot. We do have some issues with some of the utilities here. There's a number of different types of utilities, all at the end of federal, that we're working through. Looking to minimize any changes overall, but that's one of the things that will be coming back in our next series of meetings with you all. So a couple of views of that space. It's another outlook. It's got that lean rail element. We do have a rock face wall down at the base, kind of right along here. That's kind of a nod to that Olmsted legacy. There's also a stair, kind of an informal stair that comes off to the east and ties down into the lawn area as well. And I think quick view of the grading, again, grading challenges throughout, and then a view of what that space might look like looking out into the Great Lawn. I think that's it. So I know that was fast. Yeah, I know we're short on time. I was trying to be quick. But there will be a lot more of all of that. This was more of a preview of some of the key refinements, some of the things we've been discussing in the workshops that we wanted to share. And then, of course, now we're kind of at general.
Any quick questions while he's standing at the presentation?
I think for the next time.
Yeah. Questions on Roanoke?
Or can I just say really quick on the lid, if there's any high level, general, what you think is most important for him to show next time, any kind of direction for that? Or if this was good. Any variants?
I think the only thing, I mean, you covered it, but I mean, the grade issues are real here. I mean, and so I think the accessibility, I appreciate the focus on that and the challenges here. I remember when I moved to Seattle in 1987, I lived on 10th, and the first time I tried to bike up that street, I almost had a heart attack because I grew up in Chicago. Well, this is not Chicago anymore. So you're dealing with a lot of grade there, and I think, I mean, I appreciated the highlighting that in this presentation. We might want to have a little bit more on that in the next time, just to really understand it better, but I think we had a really good overview today.
Maybe kind of experiential to those,
Yes.
you know, the routes through
Yeah.
and like, oh, this is where you're going at.
Yep.
I think the only thing that I think we saw this in subcommittee as well, that the wall, that you've explored in multiple ways. The east side, adjacent, you know, Delmar. You know, it was terraced at one point, it was dry stacked, just kind of understanding that transition. Now it's to kind of like the most harsh conditions now, I would say, in terms of your experience on the sidewalk side of things. So just a little bit more graphic explanation of that.
Sure.
And as you all have already been doing, just continuing to bring forward those things that you all feel makes things better. And I think that's where it's been the most successful to look at, you know, what have been the changes since what you inherited that made it little bits better, and appreciated seeing the beginnings of those refinements on the Cascade Stair. Right.
Thanks.
I have a comment,
Please.
about the overview of like everything that has been presented today. Given the absence of a dedicated public art plan for each of the sections of the project, I would recommend that the project team develops a comprehensive public art strategy that spans the whole entire project. I would additionally recommend incorporating a planning artist early on in these design processes to ensure that the public art is integrated thoughtfully and seamlessly throughout the project.
Any other overarching commentary? Thank you. I don't think you have to stand. The rest of us. I know we're running a few minutes behind. I would like to probably briefly summarize what I've heard is the key aspects of each one of these sections. And then if I may put a condition on our vote and then put it up for vote. So I think on the Montlake connection, very much appreciated the advancement of that design. I think we do collectively all have questions about the underbridge experience. I think there's more advancement in that, specifically understanding the relationship between the fence and the properties and the lower bridge. I think we'd like to see that come through. I think that's just a regular progression of design advancement. For the bridges, I think generally we really appreciated your study of the piers and the columns and making it one collective bridge rather than three separate bridge opportunities. So continuing on that path, it would be really appreciated. Thank you. On the Delmar connection, I think there's a real focus for the bike design and how people physically go around that helix and don't crash into each other. So again, that is in advancement of design. For the Harvard Trailhead, I think generally, I think those improvements have been very much appreciated. Moving that wall is really does bring that nature back to the trail and not necessarily to the highway, which I think is more appropriate. So that has been great. I would like us to really understand what that wall 47W actually is from the road side, because it is going to be 15-20 foot wall visible to underneath. On the Olympic ramp, I think we were talking about understanding some of those views and the view sheds between the trees. I would stress not a reduction of tree in order to get those views, because I think those views could happen on the Harvard line that may be outside of your scope, but that might be where you actually get to see the Olympics. So don't force it. And then lastly, on the fire and life safety building, and I think this is where we do put a condition. I think exploring technical alternatives is very much required. And I think that goes in a number of ways. Phoebe's point, this is an urban environment, and I think some building there makes a lot of sense. I think as designed, I don't think it's at the same level as the rest of the park and the rest of the design. So we understand that it's coming along. But I think it needs to catch up. Let's say that. And my condition on that would be to really study alternates in terms of technically still providing that FLS scope, but finding alternate ways to do so. I might be so bold as to say that maybe that combines itself with some of the 47W issue. There is a large volume of unused space underneath 10th Avenue that we might be able to use. So does anybody want to amend that last condition? Because I think that is going to be the key point to our voting.
I'll just say I'm going to take the liberty to pull some of the language from the conversation you all had about the aesthetics and everything into the condition to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I think if you have captured that, I
Mhm.
think as opposed to reiterating it now.
Yeah. But my point of putting it into a technical alternate was that it not just be an addressment of the building as it exists today, but going backwards and actually thinking about what needs to be there and then doing that in alignment with the design principles that we already have. So, very much. So, if we could vote on that, given that one condition and the other sort of continuations of design.
I vote in favor.
I'm gonna go last.
I vote in favor.
I want to approve with the condition.
Same. Approve of condition.
And I'm approving the condition, and would very much like to see that FLS conversation in the next, probably in subcommittee and at full committee. Thank you, guys. A lot of work.
Yeah, thanks.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate all the feedback.
And it sounds like this may be coming back to us for the full commission relatively soon, based on schedule.
We did want to make sure that we ask you guys if there's anything to clarify.
You know, I think one of the things that we were looking for a little bit of feedback on related to that LS building was just kind of the truly the backside facing the highway. But I think that's a discussion we can have in the next workshop as well. I think so far all the commentary, feedback, and has been very helpful and definitely well informed. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's a lot of stuff.
I know, thank you all for your endurance. Every time that we do that.
Almost 175.
Well, I mean, it's a mile project. It's not small.
I'm really impressed with it. I mean, I was involved. Yeah, when I was in the city kind of 2017. Brian, good job. Thank you. Lots of good jobs.
Yeah.
But then it's.
As you started
Well, I'll talk to them again. I hope we can give you cause to feel loud and clear so that our like.
Thank you all. It's so hard to decide that it's like the world. You can
It is, but maybe, sounds like opinion is going to be strong.
There are.
Well, and they have to talk to us as much as this here, but I think hopefully we can give you the information.